Welcome back to another episode of Napp Motorsports, and today we are going to be building a 2-liter ITB BP. So I have built one of these on the channel before. I did not document it like I did the last engine build, so I want to go through and give you guys specs and everything for what's going to be involved in this build, and we're going to go through the assembly process. I've already done the teardown and machining, so we're going to go just through the assembly. I am going to tell you what was machined, what was done, what parts we're going to be using, and why we chose those parts. So let's get into that first. So for starters, this is a VVT block. The heads are off at the machine shop getting done. They're going to be a little bit delayed, so I'm going to do the bottom end first so I can wrap it up and be done with it. Fully stock VVT blocks, long blocks. These are this engine is from UK supplier, shipped over here to a buddy of mine in New Jersey, so I went up and picked 2 of them up for the next 2 builds. Stock blocks as a starting point. It's always a good idea. What we've done is obviously I've stripped the whole thing apart. You can see the freeze plugs are out, the galley plugs are out, and I'll show you that when we put it back together. Everything on this side is out, so I'll spin it around. So oil filter rod is out, oil pan is off, it's over here on the corner, it's all clean. Main caps are off, they are in a box. Everything has been gutted. This is a totally empty block, there's nothing else you can remove from this, which is how it should be. And what I've done is I've had this block bored to match the pistons. So every cylinder is tied to its own individual piston. Pistons are marked. The pistons will go into their proper holes. This will be an 85mm bore. Block has been decked flat. Cylinders have been bored. We are using ARP studs on the main caps, so the block has been line honed as well, so that everything is straight and good and happy. And then the whole thing has been acid dipped, so that's why it looks a little rusty crusty. We're going to fix that in a minute here. But yeah, so what it's getting for parts, I'm going to show you these because I have them right here. It is getting SuperTech 85mm pistons. They are all wrapped up nice and pretty. These are higher compression, so they have a dome to them, which I'll show you guys when we put it together. It is also getting K1 rods, which are not what I would recommend for like a really high horsepower motor. But the nice thing is they are lightweight rods. They come pre-balanced to within a gram, which is fantastic. I will balance match the pistons and everything so that everything is a matched set. But they come balanced. They're a nice lightweight option. Like I said, stock crankshaft. It's getting either King or ACL bearings. I have to check. It's been a while since I ordered them, but I believe it is King bearings. Both are a good option if you watched my last video. Nothing fancy as far as like oil pickup or baffling or anything like that. It's going to be stock oil pan. Boundary stage 2 oil pump, 72 PSI shims, nothing extra. A cast impeller water pump, which I do carry on my website, just prevents cavitation at the higher RPM that this engine is going to see. I put them on all of my builds, but this engine will probably rev to around 8,000, 8,250 RPM. So that'll do the bottom end. And I'll go over the head when we get there again, but for now, the head is going to get Manley oversized valves, so +1mm both intake and exhaust. Marua shim under bucket lash caps and buckets, so no more shim on top of bucket where you can eject it at high RPM. It is getting cat cams, camshafts, and I will go over those specs when we get to the head. They are pretty beefy boys. You actually have to clearance the head for them to fit. They're going to have a good amount of lift. We're not going to do a head shave on this because the risk in piston to valve contact when you do that is too high. Of course, all OEM seals all the way through, top to bottom, valve cover to oil pan is all OEM stuff, with the exception of a Cometic head gasket. So that's the standard on all these builds. This is how I get them back from the machine shop. It's okay to touch it because we're going to be cleaning it before we assemble it. But the first thing we have to do is prep this block. So what we're going to do is mask the whole thing off. We're going to give it a nice coat of black paint. And then we're going to put the freeze plugs in for the sides. We're going to put the freeze plugs in for the oil galley or the oil galley plugs, whatever you want to call them. We'll put those in front and rear. And then we can start doing piston to rod kind of matching and balancing and stuff like that. So let's get started masking this thing off. Step one, wipe every surface you want to tape down with acetone because the machining oils from the machine shop are going to screw you up. So I'm going to wipe everything down. I'll put you guys up. You can watch, wipe it all down, tape it all off. I'll show you my tricks for taping these kind of complex surfaces. And then we will get to painting, which is the most satisfying part of the whole thing. All taped off, as you saw. The front, actually I forgot to do something here, so I'll do that real quick and I'll show you, I'll time lapse it so you can see how I do it, but you can see the edge here. All I did was take a razor blade and you just drag it like down and away. And it will just like rub the edge. What you can also do, which is less clean but it does work, if you take a rubber mallet and you like tap your way along the edge, it'll break the tape. Sometimes it breaks it a little farther in, so I like the razor blade method. The back is not as critical. I just cover up to where the rear oil pan plate, or the rear oil pump, oh my god. This thing, I cover all of the holes, so like, and everything below them, which guarantees that that sealing face will be clean. So that's fine. Freeze plugs we can leave open because we're going to be cleaning them out before we do anything to them. And I'm going to be sticking a Q-tip or an earplug, which is the little secret, into this rear hole here. So nothing gets in the oil passage. I'll probably double that up so it actually holds. But let me clean the front up. There's a little pocket here I want to expose because it's exposed when the engine is built. And then we will heat the block and throw a coat of paint on it. Sorry for the noise, the garage door is open and I live on a busy street right now. So this I cut out because the oil pump stops here. And then the water pump goes up here, so you can see the gap when there's the pump on it, and it just doesn't look good. So I paint it all. It's just worth doing. But now it's ready to heat flash. So I just take a MAP gas torch, like this, and then I just go around and just, you can see a bunch of little stuff burning off. Maybe not on camera, but there's a bunch of little sparks flying everywhere. I just torch it all off, makes the block as clean as you can get. Gets rid of any weird debris. Do the same thing on the back. Obviously be careful with tape and stuff like that because you will catch it on fire. If it gets a little like scored or charred, it's not a problem. Cool, now we're gonna hit it with some paint outside. Once it's all dry, we can go for the satisfying part of peeling it all off. So I'm just gonna start at the back. This corner should be first, honestly. Nope. There we go. Nice clean painted block. Pull the earplugs out. Now the block is pretty much prepped ready to start the actual assembly process. So what I'm going to do for starters is put the freeze plugs in, but before we do that we got to clean out these holes here just so we know we get a good sealing surface. There's 4 here, there's 4 here, and there's 1 on the back. So I'm going to get a Dremel with a sanding bit attachment, and we're just going to really quickly just kind of rim it. So I'll get that set up and we'll knock those out. So all I've got here is a Dremel. I really got to get a cordless one with a sanding drum on it. And we're just going to spin it, and I'm going to go around and do just like a quick little You don't sit in there too long. You don't want to open these holes up. We're just trying to clean off the debris or the paint or whatever. So don't worry about masking holes or anything right now. We are going to be cleaning this before we do any assembly with brake clean and all that stuff. So a little dust is not going to be the end of the world. You could do this while it was all taped up, probably with a smarter move. I did not. So you can see they are cleaned, shiny. I didn't sit in any one spot for too long. You just kind of do a consistent circle. And then we're going to use some Permatex Indian shellac around the freeze plugs when we knock them in. It'll create a nice seal, and we will be in a good spot. So I'm going to take you through my process. This is on its side, right? So this, sits, well, this will sit on it. So engine stand is rotated. This is the stuff that I use. Come on. Permatex gasket shellac compound. It's really sticky. It's like molasses. That sticks the lid shut, honestly. Ugh. There we go. So, comes out like that. It's pretty nasty stuff. But it'll give us a good seal. So what I do is, now that these are cleaned out, I'll go in and I'll kind of spin it a little bit. Get a good amount built up on there. Go to the next one. Do the same thing. And we'll work our way down the line. It even smells like molasses, which is kind of weird. Maybe it is just molasses. And while I've got it, I'm going to do the one on the back of the block. So I'm going to hammer in these 4 while I've got it in this orientation and it's stable. I'll flip it upright, do the one in the back, flip it over, do the 4 on the other side. You need 9 freeze plugs to do this. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 30mm freeze plugs and 2 35mm freeze plugs. You can get them from Boffy Racing if you want. That's where I source mine out of. It's just easy. They come nicely bagged. Here you can see the size difference. So obviously the 35 goes into the larger hole, and then the 30 goes into the smaller hole, and we'll just do that down the line. and then we have to hammer them in. So take a plug, go get a socket, make sure it fits in and has some room to wiggle. If it's the same size as the hole, it's not going to be able to compress the plug and get it into the block. Take your hammer or mallet or whatever, and then I'm just going to start. Try and make it level before you knock it in. It's easiest to show it on the back, but that is what a well-seated freeze plug looks like. See how it's beyond the lip? That way the outer edge of the plug can catch it, and like if it provides pressure, it'll push into the block itself. If you make them flush, they will pop out. Greg Peters had that issue. I've always been afraid. I've debated just designing a tool that will set them in correctly every time. Wouldn't be that hard, just like a stepped slug. I have a slug of aluminum, I could probably just do it in the basement. Stepped slug, makes it the right depth. One for this side. One side would be the 35 and one side would be the 30 millimeter. So maybe I'll do that because that would be super useful, and I think about it every single time I do this. I got this stuff for turbo manifold studs. It works really well. It's called Hot Lock. It's up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's like 6 degrees Celsius or something for you Europeans, but this stuff works really well. Boffy recommended this to me, so I use it on everything now. Just gonna squeeze a bit on the bottom here, thread it on, and it will bottom out at some point. So bottoms out, and now what you can do is you can carefully take a pair of pliers and tighten it. Just don't screw the threads up. What I'm going to do is take 2 of the nuts that came on here, because I just have an assortment of them, and I'll double nut it and I'll tighten it and then I'll remove them. These are what I'm talking about. They hold the oil filter stud or oil cooling thing on the 1.8 blocks. So I'm just going to put 2 of them together, tighten them down with a wrench, tighten the whole assembly, loosen them all. And then just for safety's sake, so if you don't do this, I've seen on an engine I got brought from a customer that somebody else had built, this had come loose because they didn't tighten this down. If that happens, all of your oil is going to shoot out the side of the block, and you're going to have 0 oil pressure immediately because this line, pump line from the oil pump itself. So it's oil pickup, oil pump into the filter. So if you lose this, you have no oil pressure anywhere else. So make sure you tighten that. Do not skip this step. Now we're going to throw a filter on it just to keep everything clean and safe, and that will be the filter that goes for the first start of the car. Actually, I lied. Before we do that, we're going to blow out the oil galley. Make sure there's nothing in there. Now we can put a filter on it. This is my go-to oil filter. Come on, focus, buddy. It is a Wix 51365 XP. Hand tight, no more. Up next, we need to install the oil galley plugs. So we removed these when I took the engine apart. You just drill them out, get a slide hammer, and knock them out. Here's the part number. And this is what it looks like. It's a little brass slug. One side has a taper to it. I swear this thing never focuses. One side has a taper, one side is flat. The taper side goes into the block, so the taper is like an alignment pin to help you get it in. I put shellac around this, just a little bit, nothing crazy. I don't want the shellac in the oil itself, so I just try to get it around the edge. There's one here, and there's one directly at the back of the block. So, a little shellac. Just like before. Very careful there. This goes tapered side in. Take a hammer and an SAE socket, because we don't use SAE. This is 1/2 inch. Just get it, put your foot behind the engine stand. And then hammer it in until the tone changes. So it gets like a deeper tone when it's fully contacting. And then what we'll do is we'll clean up the shellac on the outside here. Do not hit it like this with your hammer, because you will dent this entire face. And then when you go to seal your water pump, your oil pump, whatever, it's just not gonna work. So socket, hammer, hold the socket to the block. The rear is more annoying. It's right here. Obviously right where the engine stand is. I've already put the shellac on it. I have another brass plug. We're gonna get it started. And you could take this off the stand to do it. I'm going to use an extension to get me the best angle, and I'm just gonna hammer the extension. Just like that. So rear plug is in and seated, front plug is in and seated. All the freeze plugs are in, oil pickup is on. Now we can go ahead and get started with the crank and all that kind of stuff. So the engine is all wrapped up still from 2 days ago when I filmed the earlier part of this episode. Because we forgot one very important step. It's critical. We gotta paint the oil pan, obviously. I'm gonna do this now so that the paint is dry by the time we get to putting the oil pan on. You can obviously do it later, but I don't like leaving the bottom end open if I can avoid it. So we're gonna mask this off, just like we did the block, and then I'm gonna paint it with this stuff. The one and only POR15 top coat, silver. It's like super self-leveling, gives a really nice finish, and it's very durable. It's what I use. If you've looked at any of my other engine builds, it's what I've used on those oil pans, and it works mint. So get yourself a can of this. It is a little expensive. I think it's like 25 bucks a can, but a can will last me like 4 engines, so it's really not a big deal. And like, I use it for the water pump outlet that goes on the side of the block. It works great for that. Any aluminum stuff that you want to look aluminum at the end, this stuff is the trick. I believe they also make a cast aluminum finish. I've used both. They are different. This is like a darker finish. The cast aluminum is a very bright silver finish. Both of them look great. Take your pick. Or, you know, paint it whatever color you want. They actually have this in a lot of colors, like red, blue, black, silver, green, all sorts of stuff. I just like the OEM kind of look, so we're going to go with that. You could vapor hone these if you had a guy. I do have a guy, but it's just not worth the cost, in my opinion. Whereas, like, you know, this has been hot tanked by the machine shop, so now a quick coat of paint makes it look really nice, and it protects it from any more oxidization in the future. So let's get it wrapped up. Let's get it outside in the rain. We'll put it at the back of the garage with the door open in the rain, and we'll get it sprayed. It's pretty easy. And then we'll get to the assembly. As you can see, absolutely ideal painting weather outside. It was like raining towards the garage, and we have 2-foot eaves on this house, and it was still getting in. So that'll be fine. I sprayed it as much out of the way of the water as I could. It's drying over on my recycling bin right now, and I won't need that for a few hours at least. So it'll be dry by the time I'm ready. We'll assemble the baffling on the inside, and we'll slap it on. But now it's time to pull the cover, and we are going to start working on bottom end assembly. So for starters, we're going to do oil squirter install, and then we will do the crank, which you kind of install it twice. So we're going to have to measure everything with, we're going to verify with plastic gauge. I currently spec'd out a set of standard bearings, but I have what are called standard X bearings in the basement. So it's like plus 1 thou of clearance, and what I typically end up doing is 1/2 is standard and 1/2 is standard X, which gives you 0.0005 thou clearance adjustment. So if I'm at like 18 thousandths for oil main clearance, I will use what I call a half bearing, and I'll put 1/2 of the oversized in, and that will get me to 0.0023. It's a little trick. I like these engines a little bit looser. You don't want like 15 thousandths. On a turbo motor, it will spin a bearing very quickly. And something that revs high, I just want a lot of oil to be able to get through there and flush anything out that's in between the, that's, you know, kind of surrounding the crank. So let's get this off. We'll get the crank out of its storage bin. We will want to run brake clean through every passage in here before we do any of this. So we'll do that. I'm just going to stop talking. Pick your favorite can of brake clean. Choke clean, carb clean, anything will work for this. I'm just going to go through every single hole, even the coolant ports, and just blow it out, and then we'll flip it over and we will go and blow everything out through the bottom as well. Do this even if your machine shop said they cleaned it out, because if they've missed something or didn't clean it out, then you're going to be in a world of hurt. We're not going to do the head stud holes because we're going to do those when it's upside down. This right here is a good example of why we clean them out. That was just sitting in there somewhere, and this was clean at the machine shop, but he always tells me to clean it anyways. So now we get paper towel, a little more zhuzh, and we'll just give it a nice gentle cleaning wipe. We will be cleaning the surface before we install a head gasket later, but for now we just want to get everything off of it. And now we can flip it over and begin the crank work. If you're wondering why I clean the head studs when the head is, or the block is upside down, the head stud holes, it's because they're blind. So they bottom out into a pocket. They don't actually go through anything. So if you try to clean them when it's upright, the brake clean has nowhere to go. If you clean it upside down, it can go in, swirl around, and pull whatever oil or debris is in there out. I did the same thing to the main cap bolt holes because they are also blind. So flip the block upright, go through and spray each one out. You want to make sure they are cleaned out before you install anything. If you install head studs or main studs into a dirty or liquid filled cavity, because it's blind and doesn't have a way for anything to bleed out, as you tighten the stud, it's kind of like fracking. If you know how that works, you are compressing this fluid in the block and you can crack the block. So make sure everything is clean. If you really want, you can go in with a Q-tip and clean it around. They make like longer Q-tips, but I've never had an issue with brake clean. If you're ever installing the studs and it feels a little hard, or you hear like, you know, a hissing noise, back it out, flip the block over, spray it again, and if it's just going in hard, just chase it with a tap. It's not worth breaking anything in there. So that's the logic behind that. Let's get to setting the crank up. So as we get started on the bottom end, the first step is going to be putting the oil squirters in. You can do it after the crank is installed. It's just like really tight, and if you drop something, then you're kind of SOL. So oil squirters are going to go here. I'll move you guys around so you can see. 1.8s seem to not use crush washers. They are just the bolt and the squirter. If you have a 1.6, it's bolt goes through, crush washer, the squirter, crush washer, and then that threads into the block. This being 1.8 or VVT, it does not have crush washers. So if you see that, just that's why. And I do spray through each one with brake clean before I put them in here. So this is the banjo bolt for the oil squirter. If you are cleaning them out, you have to spray in here, and then you also have to spray in the bottom. If you spray just into one or the other, it will not pass through because there's a spring in here. I won't be able to show it on camera really, but there's a spring in there with a little ball. So when you build enough oil pressure, these open and start squirting, but if you just spray with brake clean, you won't see any fluid go through it. So don't be worried. And if you lose one of these, you have to replace it with a Mazda. Like, you have to replace it with the same thing. You can't just go get a regular banjo bolt. So I've just cleaned all these out. I'm going to put red Loctite on the threads, and then we will get it going into the block. If you ever see this hole here, that's standard. It's just part of the casting. Your block is not broken. Don't worry about it. Right there. Here's the assembled oil squirter. I have red Loctite on the threads. Just feed it down in there. You can see why this would be a pain with a crank in the way. And I'm just going to thread it in by hand. And then repeat that 4 times. This little stud right there goes into the little hole in front of the thread. It's just an alignment pin to make sure everything is straight. I'll pick you up when we're torquing them down. Torque spec from Mazda, let me zoom you out, is 9 to 13 foot-pounds, which when you torque it to 13 foot-pounds, it feels like it's not torqued at all. So I have always done 20 foot-pounds, you know, at your own risk. They are steel into steel threads, so it should be plenty fine. This is one of those things you don't want backing out. And then I'm going to go ahead and take a paint pen and mark each one and take a picture of it. Obviously the paint pen will not last once the engine gets oil and it gets hot. It will fall off. The reason I paint mark it is because I'm going to take a picture of it right now and I'm going to put it into his photo album on my phone. So if I'm ever like waking up at 3 a.m., cold sweat, did I torque X down? I'll have an entire photo library of every single bolt in his motor. So I will know oil squirters are torqued, the mains are torqued, the rods are torqued, everything is torqued. It takes 2 seconds, and I used to not do it on like the first 2 engines that I built for myself. And it is the worst feeling when you're not sure and you're like, I have to pull his motor apart. So buy a paint pen, do it with a black or silver Sharpie. You can use this stuff. Permatex Bolt Mark. Not sponsored by Permatex, but I'm here if you want to. That stuff is great for the outside of the motor. Do not use it in the motor. I've done it once, had no side effects, but it says on it, do not use inside of engine. So on the inside, I'll use Sharpie or a paint pen, something that can wash away and not like leave any chunks flowing through anywhere. So I'm gonna take a picture right now, and then we're gonna move on to bearings and main studs. Main bearings, you have two options, King Race or ACL Race. They are both equally as good. You cannot mix and match, so like if I use a half size bearing kit, I will use another King Racing bearing kit, or I will start with ACL and use another ACL half kit. I'm going to use King. I use them when they are available. They're kind of really bad at inventory, so they don't always have stuff in stock. I have these, and I'm going to start with these, and I have an oversized set of these as well. So we'll go put those in for the mains, and I'll show you the proper way to install them. In your bearing kit, you will get two different types of bearings. You will have one that has a hole in it and a groove, and one that is just solid. This is King set. The one with the hole in it goes on the block. So you can see there's a hole right here on the block. That has to line up with this. This will go on the main cap itself. So don't mix these because you will not get oil to your crankshaft. Installation is simple. I typically will run my finger over just to get anything off my gloved finger. Make sure you're wearing gloves at this point, please. So it looks clean. Don't worry about any like weird little discoloration. It's just part of the coating that they apply. So this is clean. We're gonna go ahead. I'm gonna start on cylinder 1. There is a tang. I don't know if that'll be able to show on camera. There's a little tang right there. I'll focus on my hand. There's a little tang right there. That goes into the notch on the block. So I like to start at the tang, line it up so that it's flush with the mating surface, and then you just push down on the other end, just like that. And then we're going to repeat 4 more times. Up next, we're going to install the main studs. I can still see carb cleaner, brake clean in there. So I'm going to actually go get a bunch of Q-tips, and I'm just going to clean those out so they are dry. Up next, get your main studs. These are ARP studs, and the block has been line honed with these installed. So there's 2 orientations. There is the side with the hex head in it, and then the other side has nothing. The side with the hex head has to stick out because that's how you tighten the stud. If you put it in the other way, you're gonna have a really hard time tightening the stud down. So I'm gonna get some ARP assembly lube and put just a little bit on these bottom threads and kind of work them together to get it in the threads, and we'll run them all in. Just hand tight. Do not drive these in with an impact. You don't have to go crazy with it. I really wish this camera would focus faster. That's how much I put on, and then I'm going to take them and kind of rotate them against each other just so there's not any huge globs. And then we go ahead, thread them in. I'm just going to get them started by hand. And we'll do that 5 more times, 4 more times. I use a 5/32 T-handle, and this makes it pretty quick. So, I just contacted, right? It's very very loose. I give it a little bit of a twist, and that's it. Should be like maybe 2 foot-pounds. Up next, between cylinders 3 and 4, we have to put thrust washers. On a VVT block, you have to use Mazda OEM thrust washers. Part number is ZJ111SJ0. ACL and King make aftermarket ones for non-VVT motors, but the VVT ones don't exist. So this is what they look like. They're 2 little half moons. So there's a little trick when you put these in. I'll show you. I just put a little bit of assembly lube on the inside so that they can stick to the block. If you don't and you sit them in there and you like bump this at all, they will fall out. So I will likely hold off on putting these in until we are just about ready to put the crank in. So let's get all the other prep ready, and we're gonna set these on top of this so that we don't forget. Just like that. Up next, we'll prep the main caps. So these are in order, in line with the blocks, is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you're ever unsure, the orientation is called out by this. You can kind of see the arrow where it points that way. They all have it. Cylinder 2, or cap 2. Cap 3 is the one that looks like it doesn't have stud holes on it. 4 has this weird shape on it and an arrow. That weird shape is a 4. And then 5 looks like 1 and 2. If you look closely, I'm not going to be able to show it on the camera, I bet. But there is a 5 stamped on this one, like right here. And then this one has a 1 stamped on it. And this one does have a 2 stamp on it. When you take it apart, if you don't see that, or you can't see that, before you disassemble it, even take like a die and just put 1 dot on 1, 2 dots on 2, 3 dots on 3, 4 you don't really have space for dots, and then 5 you can put 5 dots on it. That way you don't mix it up. These are not interchangeable like in any way, even orientation, so they have to go on the same way they came off, otherwise you will screw it all up. So what I've done already is I have cleaned the mating surface. This one's not going to stand up on its own. I've cleaned the mating surface with acetone and a rag. If you're seeing this weird sheathing, or whatever you want to call that, scratching lines right there, and this one, you can see them right there. That is from the line hone process. It's totally fine. The main bearing process is the same. So we've got the main bearing I showed you earlier. Give it a little, quick wipe. It has a tang on it, right there. And we're just gonna push it on tang first, flush with the top, and then push the other end down. They are narrower than the caps, so don't be like thrown off by that. You want to make sure the bearing is centered this way in the cap. If it looks like it's like walking over, just what I did was push down and pushed over, and it'll kind of click into place a little better. If it's off and you bolt it down, it might do it on its own, but it's not something I want to risk. So these are ready. We'll flip them over just to keep the bearing surfaces clean and like prevent anything from falling into them. I always save these trays at least until I'm done, because if I have to go up a half size, I put these bearings back in here and tape this shut. This is why I like King, because they include this nice like plastic case. So up next we will get our washers and our bolts, and we will get the crank out and we'll get the crank cleaned. Always a good time to verify that you have 10 of each. If you're missing one, and it, like these came back from the machine shop in a little baggie, right? So if you're missing one, you can order these from ARP. You just got to call them. They're very cheap for just the washers or just the nuts, but it's not something you want to find out when you are assembling it. So we will be coating these in ARP's fastener assembly lube when we install them. But first up, let's get the crank out and we'll get it ready to go. So here's the crankshaft. It is OEM spec. It is all like nominal spec. It has been polished. It has been balanced. I recommend that on every crank. It's not a very expensive process to have done, and the nicer the finish on these, the better oil dispersion you will have. You will have less risk of damaging any of your bearings. So good peace of mind. It's a very quick process for most shops. So I do it to all of them. But what we're going to do now is we're going to brake clean through every single one of these holes, and there is no hole in the center bearing, so just keep that in mind. Brake clean through all of these, and then we're going to wipe down all of the surfaces that the crank sits on. So I did this on a white paper towel so that the contrast would be easier. This has been cleaned by the machine shop. He gives it a brake clean wash when he's done with it. But it's also been sitting in my garage for a few weeks and under a cover. But this is still what came off the journals. I mean, is it something that's going to kill your motor? Maybe not. But if you can avoid putting this in, then that's probably your best bet. I'm going to go ahead and give it one more clean through to make sure that this is all that came off of it. And then we will set this in the block. Since I know this question will come up, these holes here, some people will tell you to remove the plugs out of there. If this motor has never spun a bearing and it looks good when you take it apart, don't bother. Just get in there with brake clean through here. You can if you want to. It's a pain because you have to then tap the holes, which introduces a possibility of debris, and put plugs in it. I don't use cranks from engines that have spun bearings because it's just not worth the risk. I will get a new crank. If you are working on a super tight budget and you need to reuse your crank and you've spun a bearing, make sure you take these plugs, little ball bearings out. I'm not entirely sure how they come out, but there is a way to get them out. And then you can spray in that way and really clean everything out 1000%. So it'll come up in questions because I got it on the last build. So I don't do it, but I've also never used cranks that have spun a bearing, so there should be no debris in there. Okay, time to put the thrust washers or thrust bearings or whatever you want to call them in. They have two sides. One side has grooves, one side is flat. The flat side goes against the block. So if you picture them together, they will look like this. This side goes to the crank. So the side with the grooves on it will face away from the washer over here. And what I do to make sure they stick is I use this. I love this stuff. Red line is good too. This has a little bit more elasticity and it seems to stick around a little longer. I just take a little bit, touch it on. And what that'll do is allow the washer to stick to the block. You don't want to use any glue or RTV or anything like that because that's not where that belongs. Assembly lube is okay. So you press it on. The red tangs, so there's a red on top of each. I don't know if that'll show. Red will oppose each other, and you can see the grooves are facing into the piston bore. So that's the right way to install those. They are sitting on there now. They are nice and tacky. They will rotate up and around, so just kind of push them in, make sure they're flush with the top of the bore or of the plane there, and you're good to go. Next up, we're going to throw the crank in. For the first test fit, because we're going to check clearances, do not put assembly lube on this surface. I don't know that it will throw out your tolerances, but I always put it in dry first, pause, and then I check my clearances, and then I remove the crank, put assembly lube on everything, put it back together, and then the crank will be installed. So, crank goes in, make sure all your bearings are clean. And good. We know the crankshaft is clean because we just cleaned it, and the easiest way is to stand above it and look down it as you lower it. Okay. And then if you rotate it make sure you pull up on it a little bit. You don't want to rotate on dry bearings. So we're going to rotate it so that the top line doesn't have any holes on it, because that's where we're going to put the plastic gauge. This is not the end-all be-all for knowing your tolerances. Measurements should be taken of the crank to make sure it is standard, and then I've had the block line board so I know it is standard. So what I'm doing now is fine-tuning the thickness. You can do this all with mics and not do the plastic gauge. I like to do both because then I can visually see that my calculations were right with the micrometers. I'm not going to show the mic setup on here because it takes a long time. But plastic gauge is a good check, and for the bearing clearances we need here, we want 0.001 to 0.003 inch clearance range. So it's the green plastic gauge. They make red and blue. One is tighter, one is looser. But what it looks like, it's very hard to hold, is this little stick. That entire white thing is full of one stick. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut little sections of it, and then we are going to place them pointing this way, like pointing down the crank, on the 5 main cap lobes. And then as we tighten the main caps down, it will squish this out. And then the squish, which will be one of these widths, or somewhere in between, will tell us what our clearance is. So we want somewhere between really 0.002 or a little bit thinner. And it's counterintuitive. The thinner the squish out, the bigger your clearance. So if you have a really wide squish, your clearance is way too tight because it's pushing it harder together and forcing it out. So we want something that's 0.002 or thinner. And by thinner, I mean just a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this. Scissors work great. Just do it over like a contrasting piece of paper so you can see where the pieces go. And then without gloves, because it's very hard to do with gloves, I'm going to be placing them all on each. And I'll show you that when I do that. That is the size that I typically cut them to. And we're just going to place it on there. It's kind of a pain. I would fully expect to lose 1 or 2. And if you have sweaty hands, it sticks to your fingers. Let's see if I can show you that. You see the little guy right there? Right there. So we're going to do that on each of the main cap pieces. Alright, they are all on there. I'm trying not to make any subtle movements because I don't want like a gust of wind to blow them away. We're going to take our main caps now, and we're going to set them on dry, and we're going to take a rubber mallet and tap them into place. Starting with main cap 1, make sure you have your bearing underneath and it is clean. The reason we're going to tap them into place is right here. You can see there's a gap in between. That is because these like press fit into the block itself. So if you take a mallet and you tap it on a rubber mallet, it will pop into place, and then you can start tightening it down. Best place is to hit right here. Don't hit the crank, because if you spin the crank, you're going to throw your little pieces off. That's it. So seats down, we're going to do it across all of them. Next step is going to be to lubricate these threads with ARP assembly lube. And then we're going to lubricate the washers, which I'll show you a nasty trick that works pretty well. And then we'll put the bolts on and we'll torque them all down. You don't need a lot, again. The trick with the washers to get them all coated nicely is put all of them in your hand, take a gob of the assembly lube, and then work them together. It's messy, but it gets really good coverage on everything, and doing them one at a time is really annoying. So been doing this and it works great. Again, they doesn't need to be crazy, just a little bit coating on everything. Slide them on while your hands are dirty. There is no orientation to these washers. That doesn't ring true for every set of ARP studs for different blocks, but for Miatas there is no orientation. And then I'm going to put gloves on, clean gloves on, and we'll put the nuts on it, and we will torque it all down. There is a specialty socket for this. I just use a 12mm 12-point. We'll get them all snugged up. Again, don't run these in with a tool. You don't want to over torque them. Torque spec on ARP main studs is not OEM. ARP main studs is 60 foot-pounds. So I have my big breaker bar or big torque wrench set to 60 foot-pounds, and I just like to go from the inside to the outside in a spiral pattern. It's less important on this because it's not under any load, but just a good process to follow. Just start, pick one or the other, and then go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Obviously, it doesn't matter if you go front or back, but brace the engine stand with your feet. So they're all torqued down, and now we just undo it all. Don't spin the crank or anything like that, because remember, it's dry, and we have plastic gauge on top. So, undoing it, I'm going to go the same way. I'm going to loosen it with the breaker bar. And then, now that they are loose, we can take them off with like a little impact gun. You just don't ever want to tighten them with one. And do not be surprised if some of the studs come out with it. It's very normal because they're not in there very tight. So if they do, just take them apart, separate them, and then we'll put the studs back in when we take the crank out. Easiest way to get the main caps off now. Take your trusty rubber mallet and just give a couple whacks from the side. Doesn't take a whole lot at all. It's a little tricky in some of these tighter spots, so if you have like a little wooden block or whatever, you can do that. You can use the butt end, just make sure it doesn't splinter and put wood into your motor. It's not, not compatible. So, and then as you take these out, if they have washers on the top, make sure you take the washers off and set them out. We're gonna organize them again so that they are in order and we know that how many there are. So you can see here how it's squished. That is what you are comparing your slip to. So that looks like, oh, we're gonna be on the right side. It's not as narrow as 20 or 2 thou, and it's narrower than 15, so it's probably like 18 thousandths, which is too tight. So we're gonna go ahead and do a half bearing set on this. I'm gonna pop the bearings out of those mains, and then I'm gonna put in the STDX bearings, which are 1/2 of that will make this 1/2 thou bigger, which will put us right at 23 thousandths, which is what we want. So what I'm gonna do now is clean off the old stuff that's on there, and then I'm going to put new bearings in. So these are, come on, standard X, so STDX. They have 1 thou more of oil clearance, but because we are only using the main cap side, it's only going to result in 1/2 of a thou worth of clearance change. So that would take 0.0018, which is kind of what this is at, and bump us up to 0.0023, which would be perfect. I'd be very happy with that. And the easiest way to clean these off, no lie, is to just take your fingernail and kind of give it a light scrub, and then wipe it off with some acetone. So I kind of flew through it. It's the same exact process. You don't have to re-lubricate any of the washers or anything like that. But here, so you can see, I'm just going to show you number 1. It's much thinner now, and it is in that 2 range for sure. So these are good to go all the way across the board. 3 didn't imprint on the crank. It imprinted on the main cap. So it's right there. So you can measure it on here, it doesn't matter. Go through, verify each one, make sure they're all good, and then we'll scrape this off. You can scrape it off of the bearings as well. Just again, be very careful with your fingernail. You don't want to scratch the bearings. And then I'll do that. We'll take the crank out. I'll show you how I assembly lube everything. We'll put the crank in, bolt it down for the final time, and then we will do the oil seal on the back. So I put all the studs back in. Crankshaft is obviously out. So now what we're gonna do, take some assembly lube, and I like to start where the oil fill hole is. You pump in a good bunch, and then you just do a little back and forth. And don't worry about keeping it clean. And then I'll take an acid brush. If you go to Amazon and search acid brush, make sure you pull the fibers up. We're not gonna use that one. I will take an acid brush like this. Make sure you pull the fibers out of the end of it. Sometimes there's some loose strays in there. And then I go ahead and just lightly coat everything with that assembly lube. Try to avoid getting it on any of these flat surfaces here. It will squeeze out and it'll be fine, but it's just a cleanliness thing while you're doing this. We're gonna do the same process to the main caps, and then I'm gonna put a little bit on the crankshaft as well, just on the main caps. Don't put any on the rod lobes yet, because we want those clean for bearing checks later. So I'm gonna skip forward to that. Again, just here, 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 and down here, and then obviously on the inside of all of these. So I hope it's not raining too loudly outside. It's pretty nasty out there. So it's all torqued in, 60 foot-pounds again, and what I do is I go around, and then once I've torqued them all, I go and I double check and torque them all again just to make sure they all click. That way, in case anything settles funny when you you've torqued this one, you go to torque this one. If it affects that one, you want to make sure it's still good. This is why you wear gloves. A good check when you're done is you should be able to very easily spin the block. There should be no spots that get hung up or anything like that. Should go nice and freely. If it's tight, you'll know, and you should take it apart and recheck your clearances. So this crank is in. What we can do now is put the oil pump on and the water pump on. And what I'll end up doing, actually, because it's really hard to do on the engine stand, is I will take this, set it up on my disgusting workbench, put that rear main seal on, press the seal on, because you'll need that for the oil pan, and then we'll take it, we'll put it back on the stand, and then we will do all the stuff on the front. Pistons and rods I'm going to try to do tonight. It's a lot more involved than the crank, because we have to file fit our rings, we have to balance our assemblies, and then they all have to go in, and each one has to get checked. So we got to check 1 and 4 together, and then we got to check 2 and 3. But once that's done, the main bearing support plate can go on, oil pan can go on, and the bottom end will be sealed up. Also, before we forget, take a black Sharpie, and I will show you what I do. So these have all been torqued, and I know that, so I'm just going to put a line. Kind of hard to see on the camera. Maybe the other side will pick it up a little better. So I just put a line up it like that, and I'll take a picture of both sides so that I remember it has been torqued down. Miata's in predicaments moment. So easiest way to do this is to just depin it from the engine stand. Slide it out. If you got somebody else, have them help you. These are pretty heavy. The reason I do this now, you can obviously do this later once everything's on the front and the rods are in and all that. I typically do this alone, and this is when the block is the lightest with the crankshaft in it. So now's the best time for me to do it. I'm just gonna take these bolts off, and then I gotta pop the oil seal out of here still, but we will install that, press in the rear main seal, and then we will put it back on the stand and get back to work on the front. This is what we're looking at. This is the old oil seal. I still gotta dig out the old RTV that's in there. And then I reseal it with just some Permatex, again, not sponsored, but I could be, Ultra Black. And you put it on this machined face. So from the edge, over, up through the ring, and then over. This side does not get Permatex because the way it sits, let's see if we can install this. The way it sits is like this, so there's nothing here to seal, but you do need to seal it against the block. And it installs with bolts, which you should have from when you took it apart, or if you're unnecessary like me, you have an entire hardware rack of new bolts that we're going to put on here. So let me clean that out, I'll show you how I RTV it, and then we'll go through the install and torquing process. This is probably too much RTV if I'm being honest, but it came out a little quick from the gun. So just one bead around. You can kind of smear it if you would like to. I'm gonna just leave it. And then the bolts, I'm using new ones. 2 of them are 16 millimeters long, 2 of them are 20 millimeters long. They are M6 by 1. And the shorter ones go in the bottom holes and or I guess the top holes if the block is upright. But in this orientation, shorter bolts go here, longer bolts go here. I'm gonna put this on. This has been acetoned clean, and then that'll seal it all up nice, and we'll torque that down. Torque spec is 60 to 84 inch-pounds, not foot-pounds. It's like 5 to 7 foot-pounds, so not a whole lot. It does slide on to these 2 dowel pins. They are either on this plate or stuck in the block, so if you don't have them, you should probably order a set. Press it on lightly, get our bolts. At this point, this extra RTV up here, you're going to want to wipe it off with a paper towel. Otherwise your oil pan will have sealing issues. And then we're going to mark these with the torque pen. So this is where this bolt mark comes into play. It's also tamper-proof stuff, so if you are, like, this is a customer engine, I will know if he's ever removed any of these bolts, because it will be destroyed. So, really recommend that stuff, and it's really good peace of mind. So, like, I'll take a picture of this now so I know that it is torqued. And now we can put this back on the stand. Well, now we're going to press in the rear main seal while we have it up here. And then we will put this back on the stand. So, that's a OEM rear main seal, and then I just put a little bit of assembly lube on the outside so that it's not dry pressing into this housing. And I do put a little on the inside. Some people say do, some people say don't. I've never had one leak with this method. And then I have a Flying Miata rear main install tool. This is like the OG aluminum ones. They sell 3D printed ones now, which are nice too. You only need 3 bolts to do this. You don't need all 6. So I just do like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and just keep it going in a little pattern until they all fully seat. You don't want to go 1 all the way in because you will put it in at an angle. And you tighten it until the screws bottom out, or the bolts bottom out, and then you'll just back them all out, and it will be at the right depth. If you try to hammer this in, it will very likely leak on you. So just buy the right tool. It's a lot easier to wait to buy the tool than it is to take this apart when it's in the car. So just do it nice and do it the first time. Just break them loose with a wrench. And these are just OEM flywheel bolts, by the way. Nothing fancy. And there you have it. Fully installed rear main. We're gonna put this back on the stand and we'll do the oil pump and water pump. Oil pumps, I only use Boundary Racing pumps, Boundary Engineering, made in America. I always get questions about, if these are good, if I've ever had oil pressure issues. I have not. I had one customer car that had an oil pressure issue. I don't think it was related to the pump, and it was not an engine I built, so I don't know exactly what went wrong. We sent the pump back. Travis and his guys did a boatload of testing on it, found nothing wrong. So I have a good track record with these. I always run the S2 kit, and then 99% of the time, so the S2 already comes shimmed to 72 PSI. I use them as is. I don't add more shims. I don't bother with any of that. If you're running like an oil cooler or whatever, and you need, and like an oil cooler turbo, etc., and you need more pressure, then sure. But for what these guys are going to be doing with these cars, 72 PSI is on the money. So we're going to take this out of the box. Comes with a nice inspection and record sheet, and of course stickers. So keep this. It's just good to have. And then they no longer ship them with a front main seal, which is good because they did have leak issues. So we'll put an OEM seal in, obviously, and there is an O-ring in here. Try to do this without dropping it. You can see the O-ring right there. That is the O-ring that goes in that little hole. So we can't forget that when we assemble it, but let's get this out. We'll get it set up, and then we will do the water pump, and we'll get the front end done on this thing. Step 1 to installing this, here's the O-ring. This goes in that hole right there. I'm going to put a little bit of RTV in there just so that I know it holds, but we want to make sure we wipe this all down with acetone or brake cleaner on a paper towel. And then we also want to make sure we clean all this up because there's like some, the Indian shellac is there, there's a little paint there that ran through. So you want to make sure your sealing surfaces are all clean. And I'm going to do the water pump while I'm at it. So I flip the oil pump around so it's a little easier to see. It has all been wiped. I'm going to take my RTV and we're just going to run a thin bead, hopefully a thin bead. Just everywhere where there's like a RTV groove in the pump. And I like to go around the dowel pins. Forgot that one. And any holes that the RTV intersects with. So we'll do that, and then for the O-ring, I just run a real quick bead in there. I'm gonna pick out the stuff that fell in the middle against my better judgment. With the Q-tip. That is an oil passage, so I do want to keep RTV out of it if possible. And then we'll take this and we'll stuff it in there. And I let some of the RTV that transfers through rub out on the top. That way you know you get a good seal. And this one I am going to smear a little bit. Should put gloves on for this. And then what we're going to do is transfer this to the block, and these dowel pins here and here will align it onto the crank. There are flats on this centerpiece here, so you can see there's a flat right there and a flat right there. That aligns with the flats on the crank. So these flats are on the sides. So what you have to do, and it's super easy, but what you have to do is take it and you just put your thumb on it, and you should be able to rotate those around. So you can see now they are side by side. And then get them as close as you can. Take the pump. There you go. You do have a little wiggle room before you get it on, and then we're just going to press it on lightly. And what you should do at this point is we're going to thread in some bolts just to get them started. Put light pressure on it so that the RTV is sticking, and then we will come back in an hour and we will torque those down. That way the RTV has time to like set up and it won't leak. This is a high pressure area, so we'll push that in, let it sit. I'm going to take my dog for a walk after we do the water pump, and then we will bolt it all down. Blue Loctite as always. And if you want new bolts for these, Boffy Racing carries OEM sets, which I really recommend. I just use the zinc because it's kind of, you can call it my signature if you want, but I use these on all of them. You'll see all the way through the build, everything is zinc bolts. I get them from McMaster Car. I do not stock them, I don't sell them, so. So you should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bolts in your oil pump. This is your alternator bolt. And then if you are running air conditioning, you'll have a different bolt that goes here that's even longer than this because the AC bracket hooks over the front. So if you're running AC, you can always bolt it up as is, and then you can remove, you know, if you're doing a swap or whatever, you can take the bolt out of your old engine and swap it in here. So what I'm going to do now is snug these down just with a wrench. Very lightly. So just no real torque, just enough to get the RTV to squish a little bit. So, I mean, there's not even a foot-pound on there. So we're gonna let that sit for 45 minutes to an hour. We'll come back, we'll torque it. But in the meantime, we can do the water pump. And then we will do the front main seal once this is fully torqued because you need it to be at the right offset. So let's grab the water pump and we'll get that bolted on. Water pumps, I've been switching to these. They are a cast impeller setup instead of the new, like, you know, cheap to make stamped ones. If you're looking for these, I carry them on my website. They are a little more expensive than your regular water pump, but there are cavitation benefits to this where it won't cavitate at high RPM, and it's just, you know, better quality construction than the stamped stuff. And then as always, an OEM water pump gasket. So this is B6BF 15116 from Mazda. I'm going to put a little copper tack spray on this, and we'll put like 2 dabs of RTV, or 3, like 1, 2, 3, just to hold the gasket in place. And then when we bolt it up, the RTV won't matter. Looks a little unsavory, but that is the copper spray. Again, Permatex, not sponsored, but I could be. Spray gasket, it's just a nice additive, not required, but I do it on everything just to make sure we get a nice seal. Here's an example of the RTV on the back. It's just there to hold the gasket in place while you mount it up to the block. There is only one orientation for this. It takes me a minute to find it every time. There we go. No, that's wrong. There we go. So, water pump like this, gasket like this. It will seat on there. We'll press it onto the RTV spots just so it sticks. This copper stuff is nasty. And then we will slide it on, but I forgot to grab bolts, so cut. Blue Loctite all of the things on the outside. This, because there's no actually RTV that seals it, we can go ahead and torque it down immediately. Water pump gets torqued to 14 to 19 foot-pounds. I always do 19. So we're at 20, that's 19. And we're gonna go in like a cross pattern, like you're torquing your wheels down. And then we will bolt mark them, and we will wait until this is ready to be torqued. So it's been an hour. We're going to torque our oil pump down. The RTV has set up enough that it's like tacky, so we can seal it up fully and it will be a nice like oil tight seal. So the torque spec here, they say 70 foot-pounds. I've always just hit it with 20. You could do 19 just like the water pump. So we'll just go, give it a click, and you kind of want to alternate side by side. Go around once you've done it. Make sure they all click in. And then we're going to bolt mark those real quick. Now let's get on to piston ring and piston assembly and all that jazz. So the next step of the process is going to be matching our rods to our pistons. So these are K1 rods. They come factory balanced to within a gram. So I don't need to get out my big jig and balance these out or anything like that, which is very nice. They do have power limitations. They say 175 horsepower per piston, like per cylinder. I typically run Manleys, but being that this is going to be an ITB build, these are lighter. So, well, let's back up. You're probably asking why we're using forged internals on a ITB build in the first place. And the real answer to that is for weight. So rotating mass plays a huge part in kind of how a car revs up. So like a lightweight clutch, flywheel, and all that stuff, along with lightweight internals, makes an engine that will rev quickly. Like, think of an F1 car, it's not going to be that fast, but think of how an F1 car revs. Everything in that motor is as light as it gets. They also have some other things like piston to rod length ratio makes a big difference, stroke, all that stuff. But in our case, we want to make the internals as light as possible so that you don't lose power to your rotating mass. So we opted for some lightweight rods, which are K1 rods, and SuperTech pistons. They all weigh pretty much the same. So that's why we're doing forged internals. Pistons are lighter, rods are lighter, lighter's better. So let's get back to that. So these are already balanced. Big builds, like the next build that we're going to do, we'll use Manley rods, and I use Manley rods in pretty much every other motor I've ever built. These are just nice because they are lightweight. And then for pistons, we have our SuperTech. These are 85 millimeter pistons. So stock is 83 with an 85 millimeter stroke on the crank, but we are using 85 millimeter pistons on an 85 millimeter stroke. And these are high compression. So You can see there's quite the dome on these guys, and these have all been matched, so you can tell that's cylinder 3. That's cylinder 2. This is cylinder 1, and then this would be cylinder 4. So what we're going to do is weigh all of these. We're going to weigh all of these, and if there is any indifference, so like if one of these is a gram higher or lower, we will match it with one of those that is a gram higher or lower. These cannot change the hole that they go into, but these can change the piston that they mate up to. And when I say balanced on these, they call it the big end and the small end. So you weigh the big end, you weigh the little end, and these are all matched. So all of the big ends on these weigh exactly the same. All of the small ends on these weigh exactly the same. So they should all be the same weight. But if it's within a gram, you could be, you know, we'll say 300.5 grams and then 295.5 grams. So, you know, if one is a gram higher, we will try to match it with these. I always weigh the wrist pins. I've never had them weigh a different amount. They always weigh 100 grams. Don't bother weighing the circlips because, like, unless you have a really, really good scale, you're not going to pick these up on weight. And then same with the ring packs. We're not going to weigh the ring packs because the ring packs always weigh the same, in my experience. I just weigh the wrist pins because they're heavy enough. If they are out of tolerance, there is material to remove on those. So we're going to weigh pistons, wrist pins, and rods. And I'm just going to Sharpie on each rod what the weight is, Sharpie on each piston what the weight is, and then we will marry them together, and you will have a cylinder 1 rod with a cylinder 1 piston, and then we will get to the assembly bit. When you are balancing, this is the worst part of engine building. So thankfully we don't have to do that on this one. We will do it on the next one. I need to get a better scale. This one is driving me insane. So yeah, we will balance in the next engine build that we do, but today we're just going to weigh and match. So what we're going to do now is weigh the rods. So here I've got my rod out, well, a rod, and we're going to turn on and zero our scale. This one sucks, so it does like to fluctuate a little bit, which bites me in the butt, but 490 grams. I've already weighed 2 of them. I just forgot to turn it on. They were also 490 grams, which proves true to K1's pre-balance. And now we'll just grab the last one. And hopefully 490 grams. So these are all exactly the same. Now what I'll do is I'll grab each piston, take it out of the bag, plop it on here, get weights for all of them. They should also be the same. They tend to be. So piston 1 is 342. Piston 2 is 342. Piston 3, 342 again. And then finally piston 4, 342 grams. So all the pistons weigh the same, all the rods weigh the same. We are going to sanity check the wrist pins. Always take them out of the plastic. 92 grams. 92 grams. $92 grams. And last but certainly not least, $92 grams. So thankfully that takes at least an hour off my workload because they are already balanced, they're already matched. I don't have to go back and forth between the belt sander and clean everything 1,000 times. We will still clean everything before we put it together. But what we can do now is, it doesn't matter. Every rod is the same, every piston is the same, so which rod you put with which piston does not matter. If you had different weights on the rods, they don't say that they come pre-balanced, like Manley will write weights on them and you will see that they are a few grams out of my spec. You will have to grind them down on like a belt sander, and you need a jig. It's a specialized rod balancing jig. I will show you guys that in the next episode when we do the big turbo build block, because that's getting manly rods and they are never the same weight. Before we do the piston and rod assembly, we are going to actually do the piston ring measuring first on the block. It is pretty straightforward. I have a little hack jig that I made up that I'll show you. You can buy powered ring filers. I should probably have one by now, but my method works really well, so I'm going to keep doing it, and it's cost me nothing. So, well, it cost me the initial pieces, but it's very cheap as opposed to the nice ones, which actually tell you how much you remove. But needless to say, I'll get that set up. I'll show you guys what it looks like, and then we will. I'm just going to do cylinder 1 with you guys because filming, no offense, takes a lot of time, and it's already Saturday at like 7 p.m., and I would love to get this block done tonight. So I'm going to set up. I'll show you cylinder 1, and then you would repeat with cylinder 2, 3, and 4. Just like the pistons that are matched to the cylinders, the piston rings are matched to the cylinders because every cylinder is a little bit different. If one is tighter than another and you mix and match your rings once they've been file fit, your file fit is off to the weeds. So make sure when you do this next step, you mark the box cylinder 1, cylinder 2, cylinder 3, cylinder 4, and you keep those rings with those cylinders. I will mark everything. I mark the tops of the pistons so that when it's assembled, it's easy for me to see. I mark the boxes and all that, and I keep everything in their boxes, and I go cylinder 1 assembly, and I assemble cylinder 1, then I throw that box out, and then I go cylinder 2, cylinder 3, cylinder 4. So just these are high dollar engine builds. This is not the time to skimp out on some organization. Not that my garage isn't a total disaster right now, but now's not the time to skimp out. Let's go ahead and get set up and get started. I'm going to show you guys my jig so you can copy this at home. This is a, I believe, Summit or Amazon piston ring filer. It typically has a hand crank on here that you would have to like do this for. We don't have time for that. I took a M6 nut, so 10 millimeter on the outside. I took the crank handle off, put the nut on there, and then I tightened the bolt that came with it down, and then it fits my drill. So I'll show you guys. I can't do this one-handed, so I will mount this onto there, and I'll show you guys the finished setup. It's kind of wild, and you have to be careful when you do this, otherwise you can blow past your tolerances. Slide the chuck all the way out, and it will tighten onto the end of that thing. And then now when you spin the drill, way faster, but also, again, very dangerous. So make sure you do not blow by your tolerance. But let's get set up. I'll show you what I use for tolerances, and we will get to grinding. So here we've got all 4 piston rings. So 1, 2, 3, 4, marked them like I said. And here's what we're going to use for tolerances. Top ring is going to be 17 thousandths. Second ring is going to be 21. And there's hopefully a cool trick for that one. Oil rings are going to be 10 thou minimum. These values are not like a trade secret or anything like that. Inside here, hopefully, let me pop that box open. Just kidding, the sheet's not in here. SuperTech has a sheet. SuperTech has a sheet that gives you calculations on how to figure this out. You use your piston bore in inches, so just divide 85 millimeters by 25.4, which gets you a certain number. You multiply that number by the numbers on their sheet. Top ring is smaller than the bottom ring for the number. It's like 0.45 and 0.0045 and then 0.0050, I believe. So you multiply those numbers together and it will give you something in this neighborhood. I think it's like 0.1656, whatever, so I just go for 17. This one, I think it comes out to like 19 or 20, but the problem is the rings come in at 21 out of the box 99% of the time. I'm not sure because these are 85 millimeter instead of my normal 84, but I've been using 21 on like all of these motors and it's been great. Oil ring, it's 10 thousandths minimum. There's 2 oil rings. That's just their spec. That's not like a calculated number. And then the wavy washer ring that goes in between the oil rings does not have a spec because it butts together. So don't worry about that one. But I'll show you the rings. I'll show you how to identify which one is each. And then we'll get to grinding them down. Okay, every ring pack has 5 rings. There are two very thin rings. Those are your oil control rings. There is your wavy washer looking guy. That is also your oil control ring. That goes in the middle of these three. And then you have your two main rings. So the top ring is shiny. These two have a very important orientation, and so does this one. These two do not have a top or bottom. But let's see if I can get it to focus. The top on these is marked by an N or an N100 or whatever. They typically have writing on them. This is just a flat edge ring. The second ring is this like dull gray color, and it's also thick. These are millimeter rings. And if I can focus on it, it has a step. I can take you guys into better lighting over here. There's a ledge right there, right on the outside. There's also a marking. If you don't have the marking, the ledge goes down. So it always will go down, but these are marked, thankfully. So that's the second ring. And then when we install this ring, so see the gap right there? When it's installed, they need to butt up and make a W. They should not overlap like that. They should not make an M. They should be installed like this. But I will show you that once we get to the install section. You don't have to do anything with this for ring fitting. We're going to check these, and we will definitely have to file at least this one. So off to the engine block. Pro tip, if it's humid where you live or it's raining a lot, make sure you spray your block with WD-40 on these surfaces. It's really humid today, but I have AC in here, and I opened the door and this thing like started to flash rust. So I've scrubbed it back, it's fine, it'll seal all good now, and I've coated it in WD-40, but just something you have to be careful with. Same with like your cylinder bores and everything like that, because that's just bare metal. So with this step, you're gonna need a set of feeler gauges. I typically start around 13 thousandths. I'm probably gonna be at 14 starting, and our target is 17. So we can set these right here. Take your top piston ring, and top ring orientation is going to be this way. Not that it should really matter, but the groove will be at the back of the block. You take your piston, set it upside down, and then I like to go until this ledge here is flush with the deck on both sides. So try and make it parallel. If you have to go farther, that's fine too. You pop that out, and then I'll pick you guys up so you can see what we're looking at. So the gap we need to measure is right there. So that needs to be 17 thousandths, and that looks tight. That's not even 13 thousandths, so we have a long ways to go of opening that up. We'll pop it out now. You just grab the other end, rotate it, pull, and it pops right out. And now we'll go grind it down. So the key to using this is you want to register it against these two tips here, and then you rotate the opening of the ring into the side of the blade. And it's an abrasive wheel. It's not actually cutting, it's just grinding off. And then you grab your drill. I put pressure down so that it doesn't want to jump around or anything like that. We're going to turn into it, and I know I got to take a lot off, so I'm going to ride it for a minute. If you're new to this setup, do a little bit at a time, check, rinse, repeat, check. And if you hold your hand too long, it will get very hot, so do be careful. You can see I backed up a little bit. My ring is pretty worn out here just from tons of engine builds, so I'm using this little spot. What you want to try to do is make sure that when you pinch the rings together, see if I can get it to focus on my hand. You want them to butt up flat to each other. If there's a taper either in or out, you need to correct on your wheel the way you're holding the ring. And then also when you do this, because you're grinding it, you're gonna leave like a sharp edge out here. So what I do is I take this little diamond file from Amazon and I just go, give it a couple drags down, a couple drags the other way, drag it from the outside in, and then from the inside out. That's it. Now we'll go test fit, recheck, regrind, recheck, regrind until we get to the right gap. So you'll know you've nailed it when it looks like it's a very tight fit, but you can just barely slide it through without it catching the ring. And if you're curious, you can go up and measure 18. I've done this enough to know that that is a nice 17. And if it's a little over, if you go 18 or 19, you'll be totally fine. So don't freak out. So yeah, top ring is good. I'm gonna move on to the bottom ring, and then I'll check the oil rings. Same process. So bottom ring, the gap I'm gonna put up front here. Same exact process. We're gonna target 21 thousandths. Oil rings, you just put them in, you check them. They should be 10 thou. If not, grind them open. But do the same thing for all the rings, and then we'll have a finished ring pack, and I'll move on to 2, 3, and 4. All right, ring packs are all done. I've already assembled 2, 3, and 4 for piston and rod combo, but I'm gonna take you through cylinder 1. So for starters, we're gonna write C1 on here, and I forgot to do it on this one. This is C2. This way, the only reason I'm doing this is so that I know when I have it assembled in the motor, I'm looking 1, 2, 3, 4, and if anything's out of whack, I'll know immediately. So, cylinder 1, you have your little missiles. If these go flying, they go flying. You're never gonna find them. They're circlips, C-clips, whatever you want to call them. I have this tool to install them. It is a 20 millimeter assembly, so this is pretty trick. If you look up circlip installer, wrist pin circlip installer, or piston circlip installer, this should come up. I think it was like $100, so a little expensive for a one-off job, but if you do these all the time like I do, it's very worth it. So you take your circlip and you put it on top like that, and then you push down in the center with a screwdriver. Carefully. And it will fall in. If you go too far, just carefully pry back up on it. You ideally want it to stick out something like that, and then you bend it, not bend it, but you lay it over. You slide your tube in, and then what I'm going to do is take a wrist pin, put it through here, and you should be able to slide these in by hand. You're not press fit or anything like that. And I'm going to hold it to right about where the groove is on the inside of the wrist pin bore, so you'll be able to see it. There's like a little notch. It's just anywhere in that groove. But I'm going to hold the wrist pin so it's just shy of it. We'll set this on here, and then it's a little tricky, but you grab it and you just plunge it like it's a needle. And I almost screwed it up a little bit, so you can see it's not fully seated. Maybe. It's like flush with the top. Just take a flathead where the notch is and push it in, and you'll get a nice seat. So now we have one of those circlips in. Slide the wrist pin out before you do anything else, and then get your rod. These do not have a front or rear. There is no, it doesn't matter what side the thrust load goes on. I always put the logo on front. Same for Manly rods. So this is K1 Technologies right here. I put that towards the front, and you can tell the front of the piston, at least for Super Techs, because they put a dot on the ridge. So front is going to be over here. So we're going to take some assembly lube on our wrist pin. We're going to pump some assembly lube in this bore. We're going to get our hands nice and dirty. You could do this with gloves. My hands are already dirty, so. And then slide it part of the way in on the side that doesn't have the wrist pin in it, which we know it fits. There we go. So slide it part of the way in so that it's not sticking out of the bore yet. And then this is still the front. Dot is over here. I'm going to take the rod lubricate the inside, set it down a little bit, guide the wrist pin through it. So now you technically have a piston and rod. And then we have to do the same thing to the circlip on this side. So we're going to take our little shotgun slug here, prep it, insert the circlip, get it started, and then press. And when you hear a snap like that, that's like, you know, it's fully seated. It is always a good idea to go and make sure that it is in the lip. If it is not, and you put this in your motor, that thing will fall out and you're game over. It's all over for you. Once that's done, there's oiling holes on the rod on both sides. I like to just take the assembly lube, put it right up to the hole, and just squeeze it and close it on accident. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And then I go in between the rod and the piston itself. Just doesn't hurt. So now we've got a fully lubricated, nice, moves nice and free. If this doesn't move nice and free, you need to take your rod to a machine shop and have them broach the inside of the small end. So there is no tolerance fitting there like we have bearings on the bottom. You have to do it mechanically with like machining. So this is good. Very happy with this. Up next, we're going to put the piston rings on each one. There's a specific orientation. There's a tool you need to use. If you try to do it without the tool, you can snap your rings. It's very simple, but we can also take the main caps off of the rods. These are marked. So it says 2193, 2193. When you take them apart, these have to go, just like the main caps, they have to go back on the same spot in the same orientation. So you line the numbers up and the numbers have to match. If you flip them, this is not gonna be round and you're gonna eat your bearings immediately. So we'll take these off. I believe it's like a 7/16. We'll back them off with the little handgun and then we'll knock them with a mallet to separate them. So it turns out that they torque their rods from the factory. So I have this rod vise. Do not stick these in a regular vise. You will totally destroy the surface. And I'm just gonna break them free with a 3/8 wrench. It is 7/16. These are ARP 2000 studs. Man, they are tight. And then, while it's in the vise, you can go ahead and back them out. To separate this seam, you're gonna hold it in your hand like this, securely, and you're gonna hit the head of the bolts, and you will see it'll separate at some point. There we go. Just separates like that. It's dowel pinned in, and now you can take the screws the rest of the way out, take the caps out, and then store them together. All right, let's get started with cylinder one. Take the rings out of the pack. We can go ahead and throw this away. I like to lay my rings out just like we had them earlier. 1, 2, oil, oil. Get yourself one of these. It is a piston ring plier, and it will spread the rings out, and if you try to roll them on, you will break it. You need it for these two rings. These rings you can do by hand. So we'll take piston one, and the ring orientation, so this is going to be the front of the motor. We need to start with the oil ring down here on the bottom. So we have this with the W that I showed you earlier is going to point towards you. So it would be the intake side of the motor. This is the front. The W points here, and the W needs to be, it's right there by my thumb. Cannot overlap, and it needs to be pointing up. Now you take your oil control ring and the bottom one, so right now the W is down here. The bottom one, the gap needs to be over here. So I start it, and then you hold it, and you can kind of ring it around. Just like that. Make sure you're all lined up still. As long as you're close, you're fine. You can spin them individual of each other. Picks make it really easy. Top ring, so if the bottom ring is over here, the top oil control ring needs to go over in this corner. Same process, stick one side in, ring around the rosy. Trying to get it in the wrong ring. There we go. So now you can see there's a ring gap there, there's a ring gap here, and then on the bottom the W is over here. So now we're going to go with the second ring. Top ring is last. So second ring faces the front of the motor. So you put it in your pliers, you open it up, slide it over, set it in the back of the ring groove, and then release the front. And then for the front top ring, I'm going to do this the other way just so we don't change the orientation of the piston. Oops. And remember, the end goes up. So the end will face the top of the piston. We're going to open it, pop the back in, and then we're going to set it in just like that. And I like to do these one at a time, so I'll go install this now in the motor, and then I will do the next ones, because if you do this and you move them and you set them in the tray, it can rotate the rings around and it's just not worth it. They will move when the engine runs, so like you don't have to be hypercritical. I like to just make sure these top two are 180 apart, and then the W is on the bottom here, and then the two grooves are on the opposite side. So let's go to the motor, and I'll show you how to slide this Johnny in. Step one, clean your cylinder bore. We're gonna take some brake clean and a paper towel. Spray it like your boss is paying for it. We're gonna go in, watch your fingers on the oil squirter. So, it's dirty. Flip it over. Spray it again. And do this until it comes up clean. So, still dirty. Flip it over. Getting better. Just gonna keep doing this until that piston is, or until that cylinder is clean. You can do this next step with a paper towel as well. I'm gonna do it with one of these, just a Harbor Freight like oil squirty can, and I filled it with break-in oil. I'm going to get a paper towel. I'm gonna spray the inside with this. And I'm gonna run my hand around it with the paper towel just to coat the cylinder walls with oil again. But now it's clean oil. Now for the next step, since we're inserting cylinder 1, we're also going to do cylinder 4 because the crank will be in the same orientation. Make sure the crank is down, so the cylinder 1 connecting rod part of the crank is on the bottom, so essentially bottom dead center. You can just look down it and it should be far away from you. If it's close to you, spin it around. And then I use these. It is a Wiseco piston install tool. Absolutely clutch. It's got a nice taper to it on the inside. You slide the piston with the rings in from the top. You set it on here. You take your rubber mallet or your wooden mallet and you pound it down in. The clamp style ones work. They are great. They're like 35 bucks a pop. So if you're doing multiple motors, like I've got like 6 of these things, adds up. I don't like the clamp style ones. I've had too many rings slip out, but these work great. There's the part number. RCS 08500. If you have 84, it's 8400. They make them for all. Summit sells these things. Absolutely love them. So what we're going to do, we're going to take our piston now that we just put the rings on. We're going to take the oil and we're going to fill the oil, or not fill them, but like cove the oil rings and all the other rings in some of that good break-in oil. That way it has something to slide onto and you're not causing like tons of friction. So the dot goes to the front of the motor. Dot on the piston to the front. So we'll set this in here. Carefully work each ring in. Get it so it's sticking out of the bottom, just like that. Carefully lower it in. Helps if the engine is level. There we go. And then try to square it up as best as possible. You will not hit the crank when you get this through, so don't worry about it being too close or anything like that. The next step, push down on this ring tool and then take the wooden end of your mallet and you're just gonna, and you need to go consistently, and then you'll hear it just go thoop as it goes right through and you're in the piston, or in the cylinder. Just like that. One thing I forgot to do was to put a rod bearing on the bottom of this. I can do it while it's in here, it's just a little annoying. So make sure you put the rod bearing on before you put it in here. That was just, I'm too busy to remember that right now. So I'll flip it over, I'll show you guys that real quick. And then I'm gonna put cylinder 4 in, and then we'll do the clearances on these two first. A little tough to see, but the rod is right there. So I'm just gonna take the bearing. The bearings are the same top and bottom for rods. So I'm just gonna pop it in there. And we will press it into place. Again, no assembly lube because we need to measure tolerances, but we'll put the crank back at bottom dead center. Rotate the rod. And I'm just using my middle fingers underneath the bolt holes, and I'm going to pull until you hear it click into place. So this is now in the right position. I'm going to do cylinder 4 same way, and then we will put main cap or rod caps on it, measure them, make sure they're good. I'll do cylinders 2 and 3. Rotating assembly will be done. We can do the oil pickup, oil pan, all that stuff, and then the bottom end will be finished. Okay, pistons 1 and 4 are in, and now we are back at the plastic gauge step, so that is exactly the same as last time. We're going to take our little piece of plastic gauge, set it right on the block, on the crank, in a straight line. On both 1 and 4. And now we're going to put the rod caps on with bearings. We will torque it down, and 60 foot-pounds again. We'll remove them, we will check the clearances, make adjustments as necessary, and then bolt it back together with assembly lube. So again, super critical, you want to find the side with the number on it, 2193, and you want to find the side of your rod that has the same number, and you want to line the numbers up, but they have to be the same number. And then we're going to thread these in by hand. The rods are a little more finicky because the crank wants to rotate as you tighten it. So I'll show you a little trick that I've used. You don't want to like even push too hard on one of these because it will spin the crank around. Which is a good thing because it means we got our clearances right on the crank. Now we're going to torque those down to 60 foot-pounds. As you torque these, instead of torquing them this way, where you're going to want to pull the crank, just keep making little adjustments this way so that your forces are going down the snout of the crank in a direction that it can't really rotate. But again, be careful with the weight of this because it will want to push the crank. So use 2 hands, get it snug on both. You have probably 45 degrees to play with safely. We'll pull. Readjust. Good. And now, the fun of loosening without spinning the crank also. It always trips me out when the engine stand rotates a little bit. Okay, back them out. Same process as disassembling them earlier. Get these a little bit of a ways out. And now the hard part is when you take the hammer, it's going to want to move. So just be mindful. Okay, that's loose. Okay. Back these out the rest of the way, and we will check our clearance. Look at the rod. So you can see it imprinted on here better than it did. Typically if it moves a little, it will wipe this, but this stays pretty true. So I'm gonna measure that. That looks right around 20 thousandths though, or 2 thousandths, sorry. We'll check cylinder 4. For these, 18 to 23 is also a good range. The manufacturer typically calls out their own specs, but I try to be right around 20, and they've all seemed pretty happy. Cleaning is the same. Use your fingernail, give it a little wipe. Same with here. So I'm gonna pop this one off, check it. I'll let you guys know, and then I'll spin it around, do the other ones, and we will have a fully finished rotating assembly. Clearances look good. I'm gonna push these down a little bit, tip them over. We'll get some assembly lube in there. We'll get some on the crank. Pull the rod back up. And then I'm just going to torque the rods down. You can be less careful about it rotating now because you're not going for clearance checks. So it's all good to go. Bolts together, and I'll do cylinders 2 and 3 off camera, and I'll show you guys the finished product. So everything's torqued. A good test, it takes 2 hands, but a good test now is that you can spin this over by hand just by like pushing on the lobes here. It's going to have some drag. There's not a lot of oil on the cylinder walls and stuff like that, so just be mindful of that. As long as you're not getting any drag of like the spots, like, you know, where it's TDC, like right here, this should move nice and freely because the pistons are moving up and down, so you're kind of ignoring the drag on the cylinder wall. This is good. I'm going to start, we'll start with the oil pickup, or the baffle pan, which there's a modification you have to do, which is really annoying. I get mine machined because it's so annoying. And then we gotta fill the oil pump with assembly lube so that it primes immediately, and put the baffle on, put the oil pan on, or baffle on, pickup, oil pan, seal it up, bottom end will be finished. So the problem with the main bearing support plate, and you'll only get this on VVT motors, is, let me spin these back out of the way, the studs stick out higher than the factory bolts do. So when you take your main bearing support plate, mind you this one's been modified, it hits on these pieces right here. And if you have a NB1 or an NA8 or a 1.6, you don't have to do this because you don't have this like super beefy plate. I have a guy run an end mill down it. I do have to clean it up a little bit first, but that way this now drops on. And I have plenty of room to bolt everything down without interfering. So I do too many of these to do this by hand because it's really annoying. But you can get in there with a cutoff wheel and chop it if you want. There's tons, like 1,000 ways to skin a cat. So pick your favorite. or bring it to a CNC guy and have him just machine it out. It works really well. So I'm going to clean this plate up. I'll come back. I'll show you guys how to fill the oil pump with assembly lube, and then we will start the bolt-on assembly bit. At this point, if you do any grinding, like if you're cutting this thing up, cover your engine. For the love of God, you do not want to get metal shavings in here. So put a garbage bag over it all the way, seal it, stuff the bag down here, do all your prep work, clean everything up, remove the bag. Cleanliness is key at this point. I mean, at every point, but especially now. All right, now you pretty much want to have all of your affairs in order. I have my oil pan, I have my main bearing support plate, I have my oil pickup tube. I've run brake clean through the pickup tube both ways. Second time through the screen, out the fill side. I've got all my gaskets, front and rear half moon. I've got RTV. I've got the oil pickup tube. I've got the bolts that hold the main bearing support plate to the main caps. I've got the oil pickup tube bolts, and I've got bolts for the oil pan. The reason this is so important is because there's a lot of RTV involved right now, and while you do have to let it sit, if you're fumbling or you find out you're missing a gasket and you've already put RTV all over everything, you're going to be kicking yourself. So I get it all out, I lay it all out here. I did put the plate inside the oil pan. My machine shop takes it out to clean it, and I torque them down to 60 inch-pounds with some red Loctite, which is probably overkill, but I marked them all, they're good to go. Oil pan is looking nice and pretty. So we're going to set that there, that's all clean. First step here is going to be to wipe down the mating surfaces on the block for the oil pan gasket. So I'm going to put you guys down here so you can watch. We're going to wipe it all with acetone, put some RTV on it, half moon it, main bearing support plate, oil pickup, oil pan, done. It's going to be one kind of just swift motion. I'll put the torque specs on screen as I go because I don't really want to stop during this whole thing. Yeah, let's get to it. So here I'm going to go around, put a thin coat all the way around, including where these gaskets go. You want to go inside the bolt holes. So front oil pan gasket, B54110427. That goes on here just like that. Rear oil pan gasket, B54110428. There's a little tab on it. The tabs face out. Press it down a little bit. We're going to go over that with another light pass of RTV. And then I'm going to smear this out a little bit. I like to back butter, so I will put RTV on the inside of this surface as well. Just a thin coat, just so it has something to stick to. And then the orientation of this, the stud goes back. Take the screws that go into here, little dab of red Loctite. For these, it is 12 to 15 foot-pounds, but I'm going to use 150 inch-pounds, which is like 12 and a half. Make sure you keep your bolt holes lined up, otherwise you're going to be in a world of hurt. Sequence does not matter. Up next, we're going to fill the oil pump. This step is a little bit optional. It does help it prime faster, and I like to use, this is the only time I use the red line, just because it's like soupier and it flows a little easier. So all I do is pour, pitch the cup, and pour it in there. At some point it'll get full. You don't need to keep filling it. You just want oil or assembly oil in there, assembly lube, so that when you turn it over, it immediately pulls vacuum. So just a little tip, a little useful tip. Next up is the gasket that goes here. I'm gonna hit it with some spray. Take the oil pickup, make sure there's no gasket material on here anymore. One side goes there, one side goes there. Just gonna get it started. Put the 2 main bolts in it. Torque spec is 70 to 95 inch-pounds. Sorry, 70 to 95 inch-pounds. And now we're going to run RTV along this top sealing surface. Same idea, nothing crazy, just a light coat. And also on the sealing ring of the pan. Say goodbye to your bottom end, take your oil pan, gently lower it down. And then we're going to just run all the bolts in. 2 long ones, and the rest are going to be 20mm M6 bolts, and we'll be off to the races. So these get torqued to 70 to 95 inch-pounds as well. I'm going to start them with this guy. We're going to let it sit while we clean up and do the front main seal and all that stuff for probably like half an hour, just like the oil pump, not as long necessarily, but just to let the RTV bond, and then we'll squeeze it together. So the pattern is important. You want to go opposites. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then just work your way into the center. Even while doing this, just good habit. So the front main seal is pretty simple. This is the part number, B3C710602A. Looks like this guy. Easily confused with a cam seal, so just make sure you get your part number right. Similar to the rear main, I'm going to take a little assembly lube. Run it on the outside. Smear it around. A little bit on the inside. And we'll just set it on there. Make sure it doesn't fold that lip inward. And then I have Flying Miata's install tool. Again, I recommend their 3D printed ones. They're a little cheaper than this. Slide it over the end. Take your crank bolt. And then I'm going to grab a 21. Or maybe not. 21mm wrench. Go until it's snug. Back it off. And now your front main is installed. Cool, so I'm going to clean up around here, and then I'll pick you guys up when it's time to torque these bad boys down on the bottom. But that's almost it. And then we'll get on to the head once I get that back from the machine shop. It'll all be in this episode, don't worry. And then we'll put the head together, we'll put the head on here, we'll do all the shimming, we'll do everything. And we will have an assembled long block. We'll throw the ITBs on it. I've got the header we'll throw on it. It's gonna look sick. Alright, final task of the bottom end, torque it. We're gonna go to, we'll do 80 inch-pounds, sorry, not foot-pounds. And you will likely have to go around a couple times. definitely tedious because there's 18 bolts, but it is the right way to do it. And you don't want your oil pan to leak. The last two should always be in these center ribs right here. Now we'll just check it one more time. This, I try to do them all in the same orientation, except for the front guys. I'm going to put a bolt in the oil drain with a fresh crush washer, but other than that, she's all wrapped up. For the dipstick, since I don't have a dipstick in it yet, I use an earplug with a little lanyard on it. It's a high vis so you can see it and pull it. And then I like to set the pistons all to halfway between top and bottom dead center. So they are all on the same plane. That way when I go to put the head on later, there's no risk of anything touching or whatever, especially with these high lift cams and stuff. So halfway down, this surface is oiled so it will not rust. And then I'm gonna bag it and seal it until I am ready to work on it again. We're back. It is the Wednesday before I leave for Miatas at the Gap. Or sorry, week and a half till I leave for Miatas at the Gap. And I got the head back. Let me take you through what we've got here real quick. It has been decked, so it is flat. The valves have been all opened up, both intake and exhaust. They're +1 millimeter valves. They are right here. And there's been some bowl work in here, so you can see this has all been opened up, de-shrouded, so it's the same diameter as the head port. And then that short side radius here has also been smoothed out. So these were actually worked over pretty hard. Exhaust side as well, which is really nice. And we have our valves here. These are exhaust, these are intake. And we will go through and we'll assemble this thing after we give it a little rinse out. But the first thing we have to do is flip it over and put our valve seals in. So we've got the intake side, which is KL0110155, and our exhaust side is KL0210155. These are Mazda OEM. I only use Mazda OEM valve seals now. I used to use SuperTech, but I have made the switch. We're gonna flip this over, we're gonna press these in, and then we're gonna flip it back over, throw the valves in, and then we can put our valve train in. So the springs, the retainers, all that stuff. So we've got all of the seals out. We've got the valve seal installer. It is this ABN valve seal remover and installer. Comes with all of these. You really just need a 6 millimeter piece. And what we're gonna do is slide this guy onto here, and then we're just gonna press them all into the head. It's pretty easy. I do put some assembly lube on all of these so they don't go in dry. And as you push it, you'll hear like a pop in, and that's how you know it's in. And this head has been clearanced for cams. If you have to do that, use a die grinder like this guy right here. And be very careful, but you want at least like 0.5 millimeter of clearance so that when anything expands or whatever, it doesn't interfere. And also before we do this, we are going to spray all the oil passages like these guys out with brake clean. It's just always a good idea. There's not one here on the VVT. So I'll show you guys the intake side just because it's right here. All we're gonna do is take the tool, insert the piece on the end of it, and then this goes where the valve would go. So you push it down into the valve, it's just sitting there. You press it and it should just click in really easily. And then we're gonna do that 16 more times. And now once we've got that done, we can flip the block over. We can put our valves in. So typically these would be numbered, and I'm going to explain that in a minute. When your machine shop sets your valves, they will most of the time number them to whatever cylinder they go with. These being fresh cuts and the intake side did not give the machine shop that much trouble, all of the intake sides are the same. So we're just gonna set them in, pop them down. Don't go too crazy, don't force it. And we're just gonna go along and set all 16 of them in. Now we got all our valves in. They are in the right order, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm gonna clean that off just so that it looks nice with a little brake clean, but this is good. We're gonna flip this over now, and when I get back from my appointment, we are going to do the springs. Okay, next up, we're going to be doing the valve springs. So we have SuperTech's high performance springs. Still in the wrapper, but these are double springs, so there's an internal and an external. These are 75-pound springs. I believe it's the highest ones you can get from them. And then with that, they come with spring seats. So instead of those little washers that are typically under all the valve springs, you'll put these in. And then we also opted for the titanium retainer kit. And then you use your factory NB keepers to hold it all together. And what you're left with is a spring with another spring on the inside. So this is the dual spring kit. It's just pretty standard for aftermarket stuff like this. If you're running like a cat cam single spring setup, you will not have that. And OEM is also a single spring. And then what we've got here are the seats themselves. So this is like a hardened seat. This goes this way up. So the little ledge goes up, and then the recessed side points down onto the existing head seat. So I'm going to drop all of these in. They just go over the valves. Just set them in loosely for now. We'll go after with a pick and get them all to seat correctly. A long straight pick works pretty well for this because you can get in from the side, you can get in from the top, wherever. And then you just got to kind of press it past the valve stem seal that you installed. It does fit. It might not look like it, but it does fit at some point. It's worth noting while I'm doing this, you don't need these for an ITB build. The reason we've opted for them is because he wants to rev it to like 8,500 RPM, which is a lot for single springs. They will get valve float, and it's just not a situation you want to be in when you've spent this much money on a motor. So we are opting for big dual springs, and then titanium retainers, nice lightweight, so when you're spinning the cams that fast, you're not like, there's not extra weight to fight. And I don't know, it's just good peace of mind on a build like this. If you don't want to do 8,500 RPM and you want to do something like 8,000, then a set of cat cam springs is a good idea. I've opted away from the Volvo springs as of late because they tend to fail, apparently. I haven't had any fail, but I've heard of other people have them fail, so we just don't want to play that game. So now we're going to install the spring, and so both springs are in here. We're just going to slide it on down and repeat that 16 times. Also worth noting, these are not directional. The OEM springs are. There is an up and a down, but these do not matter. And then if you really want, you can go around and just make sure everything is seated with one of these. You can also look visually and make sure it's fully sitting on that spring seat that you just installed down below. These all look good to me. And then you're going to take your titanium retainer and these, doesn't matter which way they face, they will just sit over top of all 16. Obviously this side faces down into the valve. Don't worry about getting them all lined up exactly the same because they will rotate as the engine runs, so it's not like it'll look good for if you want to take a picture, but otherwise it's not worth it. So what we're looking at, we've got everything is assembled. You can see the spring combo and the seat underneath it right there. All of these are in. I'm going to try to use my little tool to like press them in being that these are 75-pound springs, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do it, and I'll have to use the Fly Miata tool that I've got. I will let you know. But let me grab all the keepers. I'll show you how I set them up. I'm just going to set one of them up first for trial, and then we'll go through and do the rest of them. If this tool that I have works, this is all you do. Get you a lower angle. I seat them in like that, and then I will grab the tool and I'll set you guys up so you can watch, and I push it down and it holds the keepers in place and like spreads them over the valve and then holds it in place. So it's way faster than the tool that like you have to install and remove and install and remove. If it works, I can do a whole head in like 5 minutes. If it doesn't work, it takes me about 45 minutes to do both sides. This being the tool in question, it is Lyle 36050. This is the thing that keeps the valve rides on, and then as it comes up, the keepers can fall apart, and then it puts them back into place. It's kind of slick. You just center it. I'm probably not gonna be able to do it with you guys right here, but the tip of it goes into the hole that is made by the keepers, and then you push down, and I'll put you guys over there so you can watch. You push down and you'll hear like an audible click, and then you like carefully release and it should be seated. Let's see. Oh, it does work. Fantastic. Let's look at that. Oh god, that makes everything so much easier. So you can see now the keepers are fully around the valve. There is a gap where they meet, and do not worry about the orientation. Let me zoom you out. Of the keepers, they can be any direction, and if it looks like there's a bigger gap on the bottom and a smaller gap on the top or wherever, it doesn't matter. They're still holding the valve in place. Well, that was miserable. I ended up having to do 4 of them with the Fly Miata tool, which they have. It's a valve spring installer tool on their website. Came in handy on these, and I will probably be doing it on the next one as well. Just not worth the sweat. I'm literally sweating right now. So we can go ahead and get this ready to actually install on the block, so that we can do our clearance checks, so then we can do all the shimming and stuff when it's installed, and we won't have to take it on and off or anything like that. So next step, we're gonna prep the block, get this thing torqued down, and we should be ready to do the shimming and like install ITBs and really the final wrap up. Okay, next up, prep the block. I've brake cleaned this surface and gotten rid of any oil that I put on there so it wouldn't rust. And we're gonna knock in some fresh dowel pins. So these are the alignment dowels for your head. Do not put a motor together without these. This is what they look like. They are symmetrical. One of them goes up here, and one of them goes back here, both on the same side. And we're just gonna take a mallet or a hammer or whatever, and very gently just drive it in. I'm really putting very light, like I'll hammer my finger, it's so light, amounts of pressure on there, because if you hit it, you're gonna bend this and then it's not gonna fit in the head. So very light taps. You can use wood if you want as a spacer, but sometimes it will put wood shavings everywhere. So just choose your battles. This works, just be gentle with it. Next, we'll get our head gasket, set it up on top. So because this is an 85mm piston set, we have to use a special 85mm head gasket. This is the part number. C4569-040, so it is 40 thousandths thick, which is, I believe factory is technically 30, so it's a little thicker. And there is an orientation to this. So this little slot right here needs to go over this little oil thing. I'll show you guys when it's set on there. But this is super simple. We're just gonna put it on, and it will align with the grooves facing. And what I'm gonna do, once I show you guys what it looks like, I'm gonna take this off and give it some copper tack spray, just to make sure that it does actually stick very well. Optional, these do have some like nice coating on them that does the job pretty well, but let's show you this. I'm gonna take it off, spray it. You'll see it look super orange when it's back on. So that oval goes on this spot here. So kind of give you a feel. These are not supposed to line up. There's 2 holes here because you can put it on this way, right? Like I could set this on the head like this and it would look okay-ish. I mean, not because of that, but this doesn't line up anymore. And then you're in a world of hurt. So, you know, it won't go on this way. You need to make sure you install it in the correct orientation. These should slot right through on both. And then this should line up here. This line drain should be right here. Yeah, just double check that. People have messed it up before and you get no oil pressure because that is the pressure to the head, I believe. So just be careful, do your due diligence. Gross. So I'm just gonna line it up again. Cool. And now we can thread the head studs in. We already cleaned the block out originally, so we'll grab our set of ARP head studs. Process for these is the same as the main studs. There is a hex head on one side, nothing on the other. The side without the hex, we're gonna put some assembly lube on, slot it in the hole, and then the hex is a 3/16, and we're just gonna send it in by hand. And then just until it touches, and then just give it a little snug. That's it, nothing more. Repeat that 10 times, and we will be ready to throw the head on. So you can see now, all of the head studs are in, and the front 2, if I can get some contrast, front 2 are always higher than the second, or than the rest of them. I don't know why, it's just I think the way the head, these are higher than those. So don't like freak out, they don't go in any farther than that, so that's pretty normal. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna prep the washers the same way we prep them for the main stud. So I'm gonna put a glove on and we're just gonna like wrinkle them around your hand. And then this channel, once the stud is in there, is too small on some of these to fit the washers in. So we're gonna prep the washers. We're gonna set them on here when the head is just on the workbench. And then we'll slide the head onto the block and then we can thread in the block, like the head nuts. So I'm gonna do that, put a glove on, put you guys up on the pedestal or tripod, whatever, I'm losing my mind. And you guys can watch and we'll get this set up and torqued on. Always a good time to make sure you have 10. If you don't, then you gotta order them online and you're kind of at a standstill for a couple days. But we're just gonna take a slobbering of assembly lube. And then just set them on the head stud holes and just line them up. So that way the head stud can pass through without hitting the washer. And you don't have to fight it when it's on the engine block. And now we can take the head and we can transfer it over to the bottom end and sort of have a long block. Also, don't mind my buddy Joe's car. Heater core is leaking, so he just dropped it off so I can do a heater core swap on it tomorrow. But when you do this, check the bottom. I should have done this before I put the washers in it. Check the bottom, make sure it's clean. Should be, being a fresh head job. But you always want to make sure that you don't have any oils or anything on the bottom of the block. And then the easiest way is to look down the head stud holes and lower it on. Cool. Now I'm going to take the brush, or if you have the stuff that comes with the head studs and you don't have a big container, you can do it with your finger. And I'm just going to put some lube on every head stud on the thread side. There's probably enough on there anyways from where it touches the washer on the way down, but it's just kind of good peace of mind. Of course, you get it all over you. Now I'm going to take the bolts, or I guess, sorry, the nuts, And I'll move you guys over so you can watch. We're just going to put these on one by one, run them down, and then we'll go through a torque sequence. These are a 1/2 inch stud, or whatever, thread. You know what I mean. 1/2 inch socket. So I'm just going to get them started on there. Run them in by hand before you go to torque them down. And then you want to make sure you use a torque wrench for this next step. ARP calls out 65 foot-pounds of torque in 3 equal steps, so we're just going to do 20, 40, 65. It's equal enough, it's fine. And the sequence is you start at the inner and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So spiral out. Head is installed. We can do a couple things now. We can put the block off plate in here. He's getting a QMax reroute, so we'll either use the QMax block off plate or my block off plate, and a freeze plug in this hole. It's a 30mm freeze plug with a block off plate. And then we can technically put the ITBs on, which we might do just as like a victory, a little win to see it with that on there. But the next real step is to do the valve lash, and that's really most important right now because I'm on a tight timeline. So I'm going to measure lash, and then tomorrow I'm going to call and overnight some parts so I have them by Friday, so that hopefully we can get everything done on this by the weekend and I can have it ready to ship. So I'm going to do a whole separate video on doing a measurement on how to get your shim under bucket lash correct, hopefully on the first try. I'm going to link it in this video. It'll probably be out before this video is, just so that I can do that. But I'm going to show you the gist of it now, and then some of you will be able to make sense of that. If not, go check out that video. It's going to be in one of these corners. We're going to use the stock shim over bucket setup to understand what we need for shim under bucket. And the way it's going to work is pretty simple. So your stock setup is a bucket and a lash cap. This just happens to be intake valve number 8. So what we're going to do is combine the two, and then I'm going to take a pair of micrometers and I'm going to measure the thickness from the top of the shim to this little silver pedestal down here, and I'm going to write that number down. And that's going to be the thickness of the bucket on cylinder or valve 8 on the intake side. What we're going to do is we're going to do that for all 16. It's very simple. It's just really quick with a micrometer. Just click, 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 read the number, write it down, move on. We don't care what the thickness of the lash cap is or anything like that. Right now we just want to get the thickness of this whole assembly from valve to lash cap on top. That's what we care about. And then we're going to take the new buckets, which are shim under bucket. So this is just flat with no removable lash cap. And then the lash cap actually goes on the bottom. It helps from prevent ejection under high RPM and things like that. And we're going to measure just the raw bucket. And we'll get there in a second. This will make hopefully crystal clear sense. We're going to measure just the raw bucket. We're going to write that number down. And we're going to number each bucket. So X bucket is going to be intake valve number 8. So this will have a bucket paired with it. We're going to put all these in, the stock ones, with the cams. And we're going to measure the lash. And then it will tell us how much thicker this needs to be or thinner for the lash to be in spec. And then we'll add that extra thickness to this thickness, and you'll have a number. We'll call it, 7mm or something like that. We will know that so 7mm of overall thickness is required. We'll know that the new shim under bucket is maybe 4mm, so we need a 3mm lash cap underneath it to make it 7. We can do all that math, and then you just order it once instead of ordering some dummy sizes because they are expensive, and then doing a measurement, taking it all apart, and redoing it. So this way, we'll know pretty much spot on exactly what thickness we're going to need, and it should make the process go pretty quick and easy, and I should be able to have everything here by the end of the weekend. So I'm not going to show you how to read one of these. There's a lot of good videos on how to do that online, but this is what you want. It is a 0 to 1 inch micrometer. It goes down to the 4th decimal place, so 0.0001. And this is the lash, or the bucket and lash cap assembly. So you're gonna slot this in here. Come on, focus on my hands. You're gonna slot this in. You wanna center it so that the micrometer is on the barrel. And you're just gonna run it in. That click is what you want. And then it will give you a measurement. So like this one, probably not gonna be able to focus on it because this camera's pissing me off, is 0.669, nice, 3. So 0.6693 is the overall thickness, that's in inches. To convert to millimeters, you can do times 25.4, and it'll work out, or you can just do an Excel spreadsheet calculator if you want. So I'm gonna go through and do every single one of these, and as I do them, I'm going to install them. So this is intake valve 8. So this is gonna get assembly lubed and set in the head, and then we'll move on to the next step. I'll pick you guys up and show you what it looks like when it's done, and we'll get to the next step, which is putting the cams in. All of the lifters are in. I have all the measurements of all the lifters. I have all the measurements of the shim under bucket stuff. So if you want to see that, check that other video out. Up next, we're gonna put the cams in. So I've pre-lubricated the races here. I'm gonna pre-lubricate the camshafts, and then we're gonna install them, torque them down, and we'll just do a quick lash measurement, and that'll be it for me tonight. Honorable mention, we are getting some cat cams, 278, 9.95 cams. These are some pretty big boys. That's why this pocket is so machined out. It's to clear the cams. Intake side didn't need any, but exhaust side has so much lift that it needs to be clearance. So get saucy with it. Gloves would probably be a good idea right now, but whatever. We're already here. Take that off of there. Get a little sus with it. And set it down in. Same thing for the intake side. That seems to be the best spot. We're not going to put seals on it or anything now because these have to come back out, obviously, but we're going to put the caps on. We're going to torque them down. Cam caps, nothing crazy. Just make sure you put them on in the right orientation, which we paid attention to when we took them off, of course. I'm going to run these in. I'll pick you up as we're torquing them down, and then we'll do a quick lash measurement. I brought them all in evenly. They're just touching. Torque spec is going to be 100 to 125 inch-pounds. I'm going to go to 125, but we're going to do 60, 80, 125. Just because that's what I feel like. And inch-pounds, like, God help me if you do this in foot-pounds. You're going to find out real quick. And now we're going to do a lash measurement, which again, check out the other video if you want to see how to do that. But I have 2 videos on how to measure lash. They are both the same, or they both show the same thing. You just want the cam lobe pointing away from the bucket. So it's like, it's not straight up and down, it's kind of out at a 22-degree angle. And then you just measure the gap between, with feeler gauges, between the cam lobe and the lifter bucket. Write that number down, and then we will move on for the evening. You'll see it looks a little different. I'm doing this for time's sake, but I'll bring you up to speed on where we are at, what I've done. It's nothing crazy. And then what we're gonna do, which is really annoying, but has to be done. So it's Thursday. I called SuperTech this morning. They are on the other coast, they're on the West Coast. So I called them right when they opened, and I overnighted a set of shims that should be here tomorrow. But what I want to do to calm my nerves a little bit, first of all, they had everything in stock. The guy picked up great. Martin, I believe. Martin, sorry if I got that wrong. Helped me out, had everything in stock, shipped it out. So we are good to go there. What I want to check now is our piston to valve clearance when the engine is timed with VVT in its most advanced setting, which will be where it would hit. So big valves, high compression, and big cams can be a recipe for disaster. We saw this on Dylan's motor. I literally had to take a cutting disc and grind open the piston so that it would clear the valves. This head is not shaved because it doesn't need it. Dylan's head was shaved at least 40 thousandths. I'm hoping that's my saving grace. And he also had 10.8 millimeter lift valves. He also had 10.8 millimeter lift cams, and these are 9.95, so it's a millimeter less. And we are also shaved a millimeter less. So in theory, we should be 2 millimeters higher than we were. But duration also takes play in this, and these are longer duration. These are 278s. Dylan's were 262s, I believe, or 264s. So just to be sure, I don't want to just throw this thing together and send it to the customer and be like, have fun. I'm going to take the head off, and I'll walk you through this, but I'm going to kind of fly through it and update you as we go. I'm going to undo the head. I'm going to put clay on cylinder 1, intake and exhaust valves. We're going to put the head back on. We're going to time it, and I'll show you this. We're going to advance the intake cam 3 teeth, and then we're going to spin the motor over, and hopefully nothing hits. And if it does hit, we're going to take the head off, again, which we have to do anyways to get the clay out of it. But we're going to take the head off. We're going to grind away 1, 2, 3, and 4's pistons wherever it was going to contact, and then we will put it back together with clay again, make sure it fits. And once we have the clearance that we want, we will be okay to carry on tomorrow. And I know technically the valves are not going to open as far today as they will tomorrow. I just really don't want to wait. So what we're going to do is, I know how offset, you know, they're all about 20 thou out, 20 to 30 thou out. So I will know that we have to go 20 or 30 thou farther down on everyone. But my issue is not going to be valve to top of piston. I believe my issue is going to be valve to the piston relief, or the valve relief in the pistons, because the 1 millimeter valves are bigger. So as they're bigger, they will hit the edge of the valve relief. And that's what we had to do on Dylan's. We didn't have to go down any, we just had to go out. And Dylan had some also crazy high compression pistons. So just a sanity check. I will not sleep well if I do not do this. So I'm going to cut forward, after I show you guys what I've done so far, I'm going to cut forward to the head being off. I'm going to explain it. We'll clay it. We'll put the head back on, and we're just going to skip some steps that you guys already saw. As far as things that I've done, I put on the Super Miata QMax coolant reroute. This just comes as a kit. I don't do anything separate from the kit. I have this taped off because he's going to have to put his NA temp sensor in here so his dashboard works. And then this is the feed for the heater core. This is a non-turbo car, so this is capped on a turbo setup, which will be the next video. I would use this as a heater return, turbo coolant return. I put on the water neck, blocked out the mixing manifold, sorry. Blocked this off here. Put on the AWR Racing engine mounts. Everything has been torqued, striped. These need to be striped. But those are on. Alternator, this is an NA8 alternator. So if you're doing a VVT swap, you need to run a NA8 94 to 97 alternator. That's all done up with the bracket. This engine mount is on. I put the intake manifold studs on, and I did cheat and mount that up last night so I could see what it looks like. It looks really cool. But my plan for today is to pop this off, clay everything, make sure we have all the clearance that we want, and then we're gonna dress it. So we're gonna put on the intake we're gonna put on the ITBs, sorry. We'll put the ITBs on it. We will put the fuel rail on. Maybe it might interfere with the valve cover, I believe, but we'll at least get it set up so that we can just press it on tomorrow. And that way tomorrow, once the shims get here, we can pop the cams out, which I'm gonna leave them in just for cleanliness sake tonight, but we'll pop the cams out, swap the shims in, put the cams back in, just verify lash, it should be good. And then we can put the valve cover on and time it, do all that stuff, seal this motor up, and it will be ready to ship, hopefully by tomorrow night. The shipping container is finished. I'm gonna pick that up Saturday or Sunday, and this should go out the door on Monday. Okay, head is off, and real quick what I did, I set the cams to the proper, so this is technically TDC, easy way to check is the lobes are facing away from each other. It's not perfect TDC, but it's very close, you know, within a couple degrees. So this way when we put the head on, it's going to be, because the engine is at TDC, we won't have to like spin it to hopefully be in the right spot. And then because this obviously is an interference engine now, we would contact valves when we're not trying to measure that. So engine block at TDC, and then cams with the lobes facing away. I don't know if that makes sense, but the lobe tips are pointing away from each other. That is technically in time. So now the next thing is to steal some Play-Doh or clay from your kids or nephews in my case. I just have the stuff from previous engine builds. We're gonna break some of this off. We're gonna press it onto here, kind of where the valves are gonna sit. So these are the reliefs I'm talking about. And then we're gonna put the head back on, torque it down, time it, and spin the motor, and then the valves will push the clay away where they are hitting, and then if they hit the piston, obviously we'll know, just because it will stop. It won't let you rotate. So I'm gonna clay this up, I'll show you that, and then I will throw the head back on, and I will time it, and then we'll test it. Okay, realistically this is probably too much, but I've got a bunch of clay on there, and I cut it back from the edge of the head gasket, so there's like probably 1 millimeter around the outside here on both. That way when I put the head on, it doesn't squish into the head gasket and screw our measurements up. This is the only one we have to test, because if these hit, then this one hits, and those two will hit, and those two will hit, and those two will hit. So really hoping they don't hit, because if they do, we're gonna be coming in here and we're going to be opening this up here, but it looks like it's already pretty close to the edge. So I'm hoping that this is like a newer design than what Dylan had, and we have clearance. The exhaust is the lariest side, as Daniel from Boffy would call it. So I'm a little worried there. Intake, it's just the oversized valve is really gonna be probably the issue here. So let's throw that on, torque it down, and then I'll get the gears on it and we can time it. And then I'll show you what I did for timing, and then we'll spin it over and find out. Okay, I might have already screwed this up, because as I was tightening this with the wrench, the cam rotated until it stopped, which is gonna leave an indent, but we'll see. It did go way farther than 3 teeth advanced, so we should be fine. I should probably retension this belt. So crank is at TDC, more or less. Intake cam is lined up with this bar, and then the normal VVT in time would be here, but you can see I'm 1, 2, 3 teeth advanced, which simulates VVT at full advance without having to like pressurize this, because I don't even know if that's possible. And this will tell us if we have clearance. So I'm gonna try and spin this motor over, maybe with a bigger socket. And then I have no plugs in it, so it should go pretty easy. And we'll spin it over a couple times, and then we will take it apart. Just like pop the belt off, pop the head off, and we'll look at the piston and see what we're working with. There we go. So it does spin, which is a good sign. It means there's currently no contact issues. It is a very tight setup, just with how big the lift is on the cams. It's really hard to get that like initial crank over. So we're just gonna do 2 full rotations, get it back to TDC, which is here. Yeah. And then now I'm gonna take the belt off real quick, and we'll pop the head off. I could kiss this motor right now. Kiss it. Just, oh my God. Even with me turning it over, first of all, exhaust side, not even denting it. So this exhaust side is fine. We can peel that off. Just like that. Throw that clay in the garbage. You can see the intake side dented right here, right? I think that's from when I advanced too far, but what I'm gonna do is take the razor blade and cut it, and then we will measure it and see what we're looking at. It's gonna be kind of hard to do while holding the camera, but try and make a smooth cut. And then we're gonna peel away half. Okay, oh my God. So a good rule is you want at least 40 thousandths or 1 millimeter of squish. And I can tell you, we have way more than that. And I'm going to measure it and I'll get you an actual number. But even if you take into account the extra shim thickness, we're going to be plenty good here. So I'll figure out that math real quick and I will measure this with a scale. If you don't know what a scale is, it's a dumb name for a ruler. But this one is in standard units because apparently I suck. So we have 4, oh my god, I can't see, there we go. At our worst, we are at 5:30 seconds. That might not focus for you guys. And we have plenty of center to edge clearance, but we want at least 40 thousandths here when we take into account the new shims. So let me figure that math out real quick and I'll pick you guys up. 5:30 seconds on this translates to like 3.96 millimeters, or exactly 3.96 millimeters. And we want at least 1 millimeter, which is 40 thousandths. The valve lash was 25 thousandths out of spec. So if we take, it's going to be a little back and forth in the math, but we want 40 thou clearance. And then we also, on top of that, have to stack the 25 thou lash that we're off, because the valve will open 25 thou further when we have the right lash. So we need 65 thou here at least of clearance. That works out to 1.65 millimeters, and we have 4. So if you take 4 and take out 1.65, you're left with 2.5 mil, which is 2.5 times the clearance that we need. So we are plenty good here. And we are plenty good on the exhaust side. I'm going to give this a little brake clean spritz, and then we will I'll throw the head back on, and then we can get to the fun stuff of putting on the ITBs and doing all that kind of stuff. And then tomorrow we will put the lash caps in it, and then we will button this beauty up. All right, head is back on. I'm going to run and pick up the head for the big turbo build right now, but when I come back, we will put the ITBs on permanently. We'll put the plenum cover on. He's got the filter set up for it, and then we'll put the fuel rail in and that kind of stuff, and then, you know, we can pretty much be all set here. So tomorrow, once the shims come in, we'll do shims, and then we can do like water pump pulley, fluid damper, and all that kind of stuff. But we are at a really good point right now. I'm really happy with this. It feels great. I cannot tell you how much of a relief that is. So I'll be back in a minute and we'll play with some ITBs. Okay, we're back. That cylinder head is picked up. That car is gone. My garage is a disaster. But let's wrap this up as much as we can. So we're gonna set the ITBs on here. We're gonna take some pictures, of course, fuel rail, and then we're gonna take the trumpets off the ITBs and put the plenum on it so that it has a nice filter and everything. And that'll be pretty much a wrap for this guy tonight, and then I'm gonna start putting that one together. Step 1, OEM intake manifold gasket. As always, slide that on. Apparently I'm an idiot and I am out of M8 nuts. I have 5, but I'll have more tomorrow or Saturday, and then we can fully bolt it up. But for today, I mean, we can technically bolt it on fully, and then we'll just add the extra nuts when we have them. So should probably talk about this a little bit. This is Hummerlink's ITB kit. It's very nice. I've run the Gen Vs before. My NC runs the Gen Vs. But this is a super nice kit. If I was building another NA for myself that's ITB, I would use these. Very plug and play. He's like a Miata only, so you know that they just work. And he carries a lot of other cool things like VVT, swap harnesses, and stuff like that. He's based out of Netherlands, but obviously ships internationally. We've got this. We have a backer plate that I'll show you in a minute once we do the fuel rail. And then we have like a Piper Cross filter that goes over the end of this. And these are his 2nd gen. This is not sponsored, by the way. I just really like this product. These are his 2nd gen style throttle bodies. It's a very plug and play kit. It comes with everything to like hook the throttle body up. There's a bag right here with like an idle air control valve, hoses, bungs, everything you need in this bag. So very nice solution. And they look really nice. The silver is very nice. The Gen V, I believe these are plastic, whereas these are billet. One like super nice metal. I wish the ones on my NC were billet. But I Up next, we're gonna throw the fuel rail in. We've got a radium rail on this car. You can run a stock rail, but why? Okay, my SD card is gonna run out soon. Radium rail does use the stock spacers, so make sure you put those back in. Should be 3 of them. Also, talk about access with the ITBs. And then what we have is Radium's fuel rail system. I have to get the injectors out. But this is just gonna bolt up on the second hole, which is why we're probably gonna leave it loose, because I don't know if I can get the valve cover off. Oh, maybe I can. So we'll throw the injectors in here. They come with new hardware, which is really nice. And we'll get the fuel rail bolted up. We'll put the direct mount regulator over here. This will be the return, or the feed to the line. And then we will cap this other end here. Here you can see the injectors. I believe these come, or I optioned them with the kit. They come with these little top hats you gotta press on and make sure you lubricate the O-rings. And then you just punch them into the rail. And then I also lubricate the bottom. It's not like a press fit really, it's more of a squish seal, so it's not a huge deal, but it's good practice. So if you don't lubricate them, they will tear, the ones that go into here. It's unavoidable. Also worth noting, they come with their own spacers, so I'm gonna use these in case they're a little bit thicker. Yes, so these spacers that come with these injectors are in fact thicker, so make sure you swap those out, and then keep the other ones, because finding these spares in a pinch is really hard. So, take the rail now, line it up, line all the injectors up. Oh, sorry. Flip the plugs so that they are down. And then we'll throw in some hardware. With some Loctite, and tighten that down, and then we'll do the fuel pressure regulator. I've got 3 minutes left on this SD card, so let's see what we can do. I've got the ITBs mounted on the plenum plate, which is super nice. Got a filter on here, get some good airflow, but not debris. Radium rail is in. I've got the the feed over here, so fuel will come in into this regulator with a radium gauge, and then a return out of here, which would go 6AN to a 5/16 barb. And then I capped off this rear port. You can see the injector harnesses are plugged in. I just ran them down for now. But this is looking pretty complete. We can do the VVT up pipe stuff tomorrow once the valve cover is ready to be torqued down. We'll do timing tomorrow. We'll do the fluid damper tomorrow. And then this engine will be done, which is fantastic. So this looks sick. I love me some ITB goodness. This is going to be a screamer. It's 8,500 RPM. Should make 180 to 190 wheel, which is going to be fantastic for this setup. And yeah, so pick you guys up tomorrow when the shims get here. For now, I'm going to pick up the other video where we do the big turbo build over there, and we're going to put that head together and get those measurements tonight. I ordered these 22 hours ago, and they are here from California to New York. So shout out to SuperTech for getting these so quick. These are the shims for this head. So now we're going to pop the valve cover off. We're going to set all the shims on each valve, and then we're going to put the new lifters in, put it together, check it, and then I have to do another overnight order of valves, lash caps today for the turbo motor. So if I need any, I'm going to try and just group them all into the same order. So we're going to do this. They are not open yet, so I'm going to try and do it in the next half hour so I can call them right as they open, and then get the next batch on the way for tomorrow for that motor. So step one, we got to take the cam gears off. They will just interfere with lifting the cam straight out, and then we will blast the cams off, take the lifters out. We don't really care about these lifters. I'm just going to keep them as spares. I'm just going to snap you through this. Next time I see you guys, we'll have lifters out, and I'll walk you through putting all the shim under bucket shims in. Pretty straightforward here. This is intake 1 through 8, exhaust 1 through 8. I confused myself a little because it's flipped, like the layout is backwards on mine. This is 1 instead of this being 1. So all I did is I referenced, these all have numbers on them, so like that's 2.10, 2.25, so you can see 2.10, 2.25. Laid them all out in order, and then I can transfer them over here in the right fashion. So intake 1, all you do is there's a little pocket on the bottom here. Come on. There's a little pocket. That just goes on top of the valve, like that, and that's your shim. If for some reason it is touching the keepers underneath, you can't let that run because it can push the keepers out. You can flip the bucket, and you can flip it and put it on the bucket the other way. But since these valves are all standard cut, or they haven't been cut, sorry, on the tops, I should be able to slam them all in. So I'm going to go through this row, put all these on in that same fashion, and then we will put the subs on, or the buckets on. We'll put the cams back in, we'll check everything, and hopefully we're good. So you can see the lash caps are all on there. I'm just going to go through and verify that the right numbers are in the right spots. They should just slide on. Some of these were a little stuck, and I think the Manley valves had like a burr on top. I was able to get around it. Worst case, you can flip it and put it on the bucket. I almost did that on a couple, but I got them all on. So I'm just going to double check, and then the next part is going to be putting the buckets on. Remember, we labeled these by number. So E1 is going to go in exhaust bucket 1, and then through 8, and then intake 1 through 8. And then we can finally, well, lubricate it, put the cams back in, and hopefully we're right. Installed. Look at that. All in the right order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Pre-lubricated. I'm going to put gloves on now. We're going to put the cams back in. Torque sequence it. Remember, spiral inside out, 125 inch-pounds. And then we're going to do a lash measurement. I'm going to pick you guys up after the lash measurement, just time's sake. It's the same exact process as last time. And I'll tell you if we're right or wrong. Target on the intake is 7 to 9 thousandths. Target on the exhaust is really 10 to 13, but 11 to 13 is the real range. So either or. Valve lash checked in. I had to switch 1 and 2 for whatever reason. They're all good now. 1 is technically like 0.01, but it's a loose 10 thou, and the 11 doesn't fit, so we'll call it 10.5. 10 to 13 is fine, sorry, for the exhaust side, and then 7 to 9 for the intake side. There is a little wiggle room. That's just the target that I try to hit. So we're all good. We are all in spec, which means we can do cam seals, valve cover gasket, well, cam seals, time it, valve cover gasket, and then do all the accessory like the fluid damper, seal the motor up for good, and get this thing ready to ship. Okay, next customer car is here, but whatever. So, weird fact, this stem is too long on the intake, or exhaust cam only. Intake side is fine. You can see this presses all the way up against the block. This one was too long, and I spoke to Daniel over at Boffy, and he said it's very common to have to trim them. So I just took this guy, tarped the motor and held the tarp here, and just cut so that the sparks would fly down and away. Just super weird, but now a good test is we'll take the cam, and you can see it is now not sticking out beyond the face, but it's still enough to register it. So just a really weird thing, but now we can go ahead and use actually the installer tool, which will let us push this into the right depth, and we can install both seals. Put some assembly lube. I put it on the inside and the outside. Some people are going to call that controversial. Slide it on. And then for the intake one, it's a little weird because it doesn't actually center on the cam itself, but we're still going to lubricate the inside because that's where the timing gear will slide on. Take your installer tool, thread in the factory bolt, and then just using a wrench, ratchet, whatever, slowly drive it in, and it will just bottom out. That's it. Like 1 finger's worth of pressure is good enough. You shouldn't be spinning the cam. There should not be enough pressure for that. Same process for the intake side, or exhaust side, sorry. Pull it started. And we're just going to slowly drive this in. It shouldn't hang up anywhere until you get it fully installed. Now we can back that out. And now at this point you can install your cam gears. So this one will have, obviously VVTs have two different gears. The exhaust gear is the same as the intake gear on like a regular BP4W or NA8. They have an E and an I and a Z on them. So on the exhaust side, you want the E to line up with the spoke or the dowel pin on the cam. And I'm going to put some blue Loctite on this. For the VVT gear, let me see what you guys can see. There's two slots, that's where VVT actuates. And there's like two holes here and one hole here. This hole on the right is the one that goes onto the dowel pin. It's the only one that fits. So what you can actually do is install this and just, there you go. So rotate it until it pops in, and then you know you're seated all the way. You can make sure they are in line this way. But little red Loctite or blue Loctite. Up next, we're going to torque them 37 to 44 foot-pounds, and make sure, let me zoom you out. Make sure you are holding the cam with a wrench. There's like a wrench spot on the stock cams. It's kind of here in the center, but Tomei puts them over here. And then we'll put this cover on. They don't make this gasket anymore, so make sure you keep it when you take your engine apart. This is the gasket in question. I just wiped it down a little bit, and I'm going to spray it with some of this copper tack spray stuff. This is a wet passage, so if you don't put a gasket here, you can RTV it if you don't have a gasket, but if you don't put a gasket here, you will get oil leaking out of the front of your motor. So I'm going to spray this, and then we'll install it. Goes along with this backer plate, and then these little screws that I've put some blue Loctite on. These are T25 Torx, and I don't have a torque spec for them, so I don't really have a good answer for you, but I just make them nice and tight. They are small, so you can't strip them if you go too crazy. Next step is going to be timing it. I do have a little trick of the trade here. So I've got these timed, so E is up, the line next to the I is facing this line here, and the line over here is facing this. A good sanity check is that the first two cam lobes on each cam are pointing directly 180 degrees away from each other. And then the crank is actually, we call it half a tooth or just a little bit behind or retarded. Put the belt on. And you'll notice it doesn't go over the intake cam. So I'm going to try to do this first try, but now I'm going to advance the crank until it is at top dead center. And what that does is take the slack out of this line. So what I ended up doing is popping it off of this cover here and then sliding it back on. It's easier than getting it on all the teeth. But now we've got tension on this side, which is what we want because the tensioner is over here. And then we're gonna put the spring on. And I don't know if this is important or not or whatever, but the way the hook faces, I always associate it with the way the belt spins. So these motors go this way. So I always put the hook facing away from the belt. That way if anything ever happens, it's just gonna touch the smooth side of the spring, and then it's not going to rip and shred the belt. It might not matter at all, but it's just what I do. Okay, take the tools out, unlock the gears, and then we're gonna spin it over 2 times so that this can set the proper tension and get out of there. And then we will tighten this guy down over here and we'll torque this guy down and we will be happy. Spark plugs are out. It's still gonna be hard to spin, but spark plugs are out. So 2 full rotations. And then I like to stop. Anything after 2 full rotations is okay. I just like to make sure that this belt feels like it has good tension. And while I'm holding this, I'm going to tighten that bolt. Not torque it yet, but just make sure it's snug so that it can't slip. Engine is now timed. I'll grab the torque specs for these right now, and then we can bolt mark that, and then we'll put the timing cover on, we'll put the fluid damper on, we'll put the valve cover on for good, and we will seal this motor up. 28 to 38 foot-pounds. I'm gonna go gently just to make sure. Yep. And then we'll get our friend the bolt marker out. I'll mark these as well as these so I know they're tightened. And then we can get to beautifying this thing and hopefully have a finished motor very shortly here. Up next, timing belt covers. So this is the lower and these are replacements. You can find them on Amazon. Not terribly expensive. And then we have the upper one here. It's never worth, in my opinion, trying to reuse them because they just always get so nasty. So I'm gonna grab some bolts for these spots. We'll bolt that in. We'll put the upper timing cover on. All right, valve cover has a fresh OEM gasket on it. I'm gonna go ahead and put RTV in the corners of all 3 cam caps that are exposed. Don't have to go crazy with this, just a little. We'll lower this down. Okay, for hardware you can see I do something a little fancier. This is Downstar hardware. They sell a Miata kit, they don't sell a VVT kit. So what I do is I buy the Miata kit, and then I buy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I believe, M6 by 1mm, 20mm long bolts. And then the kit comes with 2 shorties. One goes here, and then one is a spare that I'll end up putting up here. So you can make your own kit. Have been intending to reach out to them and have them just offer a VVT kit because it'd be super easy and save me a headache every time. But I think these look way nicer. I hate the acorn bolts that the factory comes with. And this is one of those like little details that just makes it that extra last. Torque spec for these is 43 to 78 inch-pounds. I'm just going to go to 78. Up next, spark plugs. These are NGK BKR 7Es, gap to right 32 thousandths roughly. If this was a turbo motor, I would go to like 25 thou, but because the cylinder pressure is not going to be crazy, we'll do 20 or 32, and don't ever drop these in. I'm guiding them in until they are touching the bottom, because if you drop them, you can change your gap or remove your gap entirely. And then we'll go in with the tool. And before you comment that you can put them in the tool and lower them down, I don't have the little rubber grommet in here because it got stuck on so many spark plugs when I was installing it that I just threw it out, because it was more infuriating trying to reach in and grab this little rubber gasket than it is to just lower them in with my finger. The right answer would be some magnetic spark plug sockets, but here we are. So these are crush washer style spark plugs, so you don't just like snug them up and leave. You have to tighten, and then you have to go, and you'll feel the crush washer go, and then it gets tight. It is amazing the number of people that do not know how to tighten spark plugs. I'm sure you can find a torque spec online if you're unsure. But it's more of a feel thing. And then this car is getting R8 coils, so I've got those in the box over there. We'll pop them in. I got to build a wiring harness. I'll do that off camera. These are likely overkill for an ITB car, but a lot of this is the aesthetic, and I wish I had gotten the blue ones that you can find. But I didn't know the color of the motor, and I might offer him to switch it or just ship him blue ones, and I'll keep these. But these are NGK R8 coil replacements. They just go down, they pop in really nice. There we go. You don't need a bracket. I think one company makes a bracket for these for the VVT. I don't worry about it. I've never had an issue with it. Obviously, if you dump water in here, it's going to go down through the hole, but when is the top of your engine ever really getting soaked? So these are on here. I'll build the harness later. If you want this kit, I would just check out Flow Force's R8 kit. It comes with a plug-and-play harness. I just like to make my life difficult, and I'll build my own harness. So the plug-and-play stuff is really nice, and definitely the proper way to do this if you're doing it on your own. All right, next we will do trigger wheel and fluid damper. Crank pulley is pretty easy. So first of all, I use a fluid damper on all engine builds, unless for some reason the customer already has an ATI and I can't talk them out of it. And then I use a Boffy Racing 36-2 trigger wheel, so there's 2 teeth missing here. Proper orientation for one of these trigger wheels is that the missing, so this is the keyway right here, this is the top. The missing teeth are around like 9:30, 10 o'clock on the trigger wheel. If they're over here, you have it installed backwards and you got to swap it out, otherwise you're going to have timing issues. So this is super easy. This just slides on over the existing setup, and then I'm going to take some blue Loctite on the bolt. And then take the big old Milwaukee. And then once this thing is off the stand, I will grab a torque wrench and torque that to spec. It's just I can't get back in there with like a safe way to hold the crank. So another little trick that I do, whatever you want to call it, is I take some silver Sharpie on these timing marks here, and I'll show you guys that. And I just highlight them. That way when this is in your engine bay and it's down in the darkness, you can read what your timing is at. Hopefully this silver Sharpie works. There we go. So I just color the top of all of the teeth. And then I'm also going to color in the T and the 10. So now you can read it when it is running in the engine and you're not like trying to shine a flashlight on it while you've got the trigger light going off. So last step here is a water pump pulley and putting the belt on. And then this engine will be a wrap for you guys. I got a couple things to wrap up before it goes to the customer, but for all intents and purposes, once that is on, we are done. Water pump pulley. There's only really so much you can do with these to make them look decent, outside of like getting them powder coated, which I haven't done yet. Maybe I'll just order a bunch of them and have them all powder coat prepped and just sell like a refurbished powder pump, water pump pulley, because these always seem to get really crusty. Turns out I do have an alternator belt, so we'll set that on. I don't know if somebody can explain this to me, but I always, come on, seem to struggle with fitting these belts. Like, the alternator is at full slack and like just barely fits over. So a good rule of thumb for belts like this is you should be able to give it half a rotation, but any more than that should really be pretty difficult. So I'd say that's pretty good. Maybe another one for good luck. And then make sure you tighten this bolt, and the main bolt back here that I already have a wrench on. The pivot bolt on the bottom, otherwise it will come loose. These I don't bolt mark because they are like a service item. Same with the covers and things like that. I just don't do that. They're service items, so if you ever have to take this off, the bolt mark gets everywhere. And it's not like it's the end of the world if one of them comes loose. It's very easy to tighten. So, and then the engine is almost done. The last thing we have to do is the VVT up pipe, which looks like this. I'm going to take this bracket off. I never use this. And I'm going to clean this end up and like give this thing a little bit of a spritz. So I'm going to start at the top. We're going to use a specific VVT bolt with a new crush washer on the other side, and then we're just going to feed this up here and at least get it started. And then underneath here we will end up using a specific banjo bolt with 2 crush washers as well. So a new combo is, the combo is going to be the banjo bolt with a crush washer, and then there's a crush washer that goes between the block and the bracket, and it goes into this hole right here. It's a little tricky. Run that in. Then we'll tighten the one up top with a 19 and be done. 19 millimeter on this guy. Just give it a good snug. And we're all set. So this is the end of the episode. This is the end of the engine build. And we are looking at a 2-liter ITB motor with Hummelink Modifications ITBs, a Napp Motorsports built long block. This is a Lake Blue valve cover, and there is a Goodwin Racing Roadster Sport header in the basement. I'm just not going to mount it because it's not going to fit in the shipping crate. In reality, this engine should make around 180 wheel horsepower with the right tune, and should be able to handle 8,500 RPM. It's going to be a little ripper of a motor for sure. I appreciate you guys sticking through another one of these really long engine build videos. You guys seem to love the last one, so I have this one filmed, and I am finishing another one up tomorrow with a 500 horsepower turbo setup. So we're going to keep these coming if I can. I'm not going to film every engine build. I'm just going to film all of the engine builds that are different than my standard. So if you have something wild you want built, feel free to hit me up. I'm happy to talk you through the quoting process and we can get started. If you want to do a build on your own, I carry a build in the box, which is every part you would need to build a long block, all in one spot. You can get it from me. You get parts, specifications, and my support. along the way if you need any help or anything like that, like a phone call, whatever. Happy to help. But yeah, you guys know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe, let me know what you guys want to see next, and I'll make that happen. Until next time.